Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, the seagulls stretch out their majestic white wings. They pirouette, surf and sail across the sky with grace and agility, like masterful acrobats, with white feathery plumage, yellow beaks and dark, sharp eyes that don't miss a trick. For these birds of the ocean notice everything. They notice the strange bundle of bedraggled clothes that appears to have washed up on the beach, tangled and knotted up in seaweed. They observe a couple of tasty dead fish. They notice someone's sunglasses and an old shoe lying tucked under a layer of beach sand. The grey sky hints of a blue dawning as it lightens and becomes stained with the subtle injections of yellow and orange as the sun rises across the ocean, leaving a shimmering glaze over the water. The seagulls' loud, raucous shrieks can be heard for miles around. People lying fast asleep in their cosy beds lightly hear them, as a familiar background intrusion in their dreams that they are well acquainted with, so it wakes them not up. The nurses returning from night shift lightly hear them. The bakers rising early to get bread in the oven on time lightly hear them. The night watchman guarding the old museum in town lightly hears them. The young man getting up for a morning jog lightly hears them. The children being woken up to get ready for school lightly hear them. The adults preparing for a day of work hear them. And the recently widowed old man, Weston Taylor, hears them. It is their calls that has rudely jolted him out of his sleep, as if he suddenly sustained a whiplash injury from being flung forwards from unconsciousness to consciousness in a single second. By all accounts, in this serene, idyllic part of the world, it's not the sound of a rooster that wakes you from your sweet, restful slumber, announcing the birth of a brand new day, but it is the seagull that fulfills that pivotal role, seeing it as an essential part of their early morning routines, to impress upon all the local residents in this beachside town to become aware of the new day that now lies ahead of them, like a bright opportunity. Weston Taylor opens his eyes when he hears the seagulls, as he still has not become acclimatized to their loud screeches. "Damn those wretched birds," he mutters under his breath. "I'd happily wring their necks right now, if given the chance. Why do they have to be so damn noisy? I was having such a good dream, but they've ruined it for me now." He knew full well from learned experience that now that he'd been rudely awakened by a seagull's shrieks, that he'd never get back to sleep, which means he may as well get up and potter around the house, making coffee for himself and taking his beloved dog Trout to the beach for his morning walk. So with a resigned, wary sigh, dappled with a degree of acceptance, he glanced briefly at the endearing childlike ladybug alarm clock on his nightstand that had been given to him by his daughter Kirsty when she was only 11 years old for his birthday. He still remembers how proud his daughter had been to give it to him. "I got it for you, Daddy, 'cause ladybugs are lucky," she told him proudly. "The clock will keep you lucky, and you'll never ever be late for work, ever." It would seem the ladybug clock had indeed been lucky, as even after all these long years, the clock still kept perfect timing. It reads the time on its bug-like face as being 5:10. Weston recently moved into a contemporary, unconventional, square-shaped house, made of glass and steel, with intentional avant-garde symmetry that incorporated state-of-the-art, sharp, clean lines and a distinctive geometric shape. Weston remembers the estate agent vividly oohing and ahhing about this revolutionary house. "It's a fine work of art, Mr. Taylor," she had said. "This house makes a wonderful statement that demands to be noticed, let me tell you. It makes you pay attention to it. If this place was small enough and was portable," she chuckled, as if amused with her own ingenious joke, "I'm in no doubt it would be on display at the Museum of Modern Art. Mr. Taylor, all I can say, if you and your lovely wife buy this extraordinary architectural creation, you have your very own Jackson Pollock on the beach. If you get my drift," she said, giving Mr. Taylor a mischievous wink. "What I ask you can be better than that. You're setting a trend in this beachside town, where people hang on to the old ways and tradition, Mr. Taylor, as if it's their very best friend. They're so afraid to embrace anything new. But this house throws people out of their comfort zone, does it not? With a great big bang," she trilled happily, like a delighted songbird. "I mean, have you ever seen such pioneering architecture? Mastery like this, Mr. Taylor. The architect has thought of every detail in regards to this house. Natural lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows that maximize the stunning benefits of those very idyllic oceanfront views. I mean, what is there not to love about this incredible in-vogue place, Mr. Taylor?" Weston, who liked classic designs and historical architecture, wondered why on earth the estate agent was so incredibly enamoured by the progressive, untraditional symmetry of the house, that obviously shunned features like arches, ornate columns, window shutters, and attractive ornamentation. By contrast, this modernistic house indulged itself in embodying an industrial look, with minimalistic undertones, with no decorative or lavish embellishments. Weston privately thought the house on the outside looked like a modernistic or rather unfriendly office block, but he chose to say nothing, as the estate agent seemed hell-bent on insisting that this house was one of a kind, and would likely take offence if you didn't agree with her interpretation of the place. Indeed, the estate agent was like a cat who had been initiated by its owners to eat vegan steaks, and had been persuaded to think they were more wonderful than the real juicy, meaty equivalent, as she was one of those people that clearly thought all things new were so much better than anything old. Weston personally liked the confident reassurance of classic architecture that would weather the storms of time and look great and current even 300 years from now. He was sure that by then this ultra-modern, state-of-the-art home, built from steel and glass that he was viewing, would long since have gone out of fashion and even appear outdated. He had given the estate agent a watery smile and said, "Nice," for he didn't know what else to say. The agent had not been remotely impressed by his employment of the word nice. It would seem the word nice had made her eyes pop out of her head, and her mouth drop open and close like a stunned goldfish. It was not exactly how she would have described this modernistic property. "Nice," she said, looking at Mr. Taylor with an aghast expression on her face, as if he'd knocked the wind out of her sails, or kicked her hard in the guts. "Nice," she said, repeating the word again. "I am so glad, Mr. Taylor, that the architect, Revel Ferguson, is not here to listen to you use the word nice to describe this illustrious place. Mr. Taylor, this property is cutting edge. It's state-of-the-art. If you buy this property, you'll be setting a trend in this very modest seaside town, making a statement. Your house, Mr. Taylor, well, this house is one of a kind. That can never be overlooked, and it never should be either. Weston had smiled rather bashfully at the estate agent and shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. Look, I'm very sorry if I offended you. I'm not into all this modern stuff. I really am not. But I do like the windows, the natural light the property generously invites into the house. That is extremely good, and me and my wife really appreciate that. But this modern style, no, it's not my thing. Not everybody likes Jackson Pollock, you know, Miss Walters, he had told her gingerly, to make his point very clear. The estate agent's face had almost contorted in disbelief. These were outsiders from Houston in Texas. Surely they'd have been more open to innovative architecture like this than the locals in town. She had been so sure outsiders would have thought this property was like manna from heaven, where the future had come crashing through the clouds and spilled its magic on the beach. But much like the locals in this part of the world, Weston and his wife Jo were stubborn, resolute traditionalists that viewed change suspiciously, approaching it with a reluctant caution, like a dog might sniff a brand new dog on the beach, with a degree of uncertainty, to determine whether the new friend crossing their path was actually friend or foe. The Taylors will fit in here very nicely, the estate agent thought privately to herself. They're cut out from the same predictable cloth. It would seem she was bitterly disappointed that the couple did not see the property through her eyes or share her enthusiasm. But still it was a sale, and no estate agent is going to look a gift horse in the mouth, even if her potential buyers had failed to appreciate the stunning masterpiece. In truth, for Weston and his wife, it was the prime location of the property, its availability for purchase, its not too hectic price tag, and the spectacular oceanfront views that had made the house an irresistible purchase. And they had overlooked the fact that it looked a little like a New Age spacecraft from some kind of Star Trek galaxy 100 light years away, and like a meteor had crash-landed on the edge of the beach to shock all the local residents in town, who lightly thought the house was an eyesore or a monstrosity. There was no doubt it did stick out among the other houses in these parts, like a sore thumb. It would be like going to a traditional boarding school that embraced old values and traditions, and one of the kids rocks up in your classroom with bright pink punk rock hair, piercings and tattoos, and causes a great deal of shock to the teachers and the children alike. Or like a classic art exhibition in town, incorporating artwork that many might think had been done by a 3-year-old child who had thrown cans of paint at a white canvas, popping it up on the wall with a hefty price tag that would make many faint. Ostensibly, you would have lightly expected the interiors of this modern house that Weston and his wife Jo had purchased to embrace a Tesla kind of technology, with ovens that made your food for you at the press of a button, self-cleaning robots that lightly washed your dishes or made up your beds for you, or buttons that opened and closed the blinds for you, or switched lights and music on and off for you with the slap of a hand. Luckily, although the interiors of Weston's house embraced open-plan living, it was a long way off from AI technology, which was a huge relief to Weston. He would not have liked a house that did all the thinking for him. Suffice to say, without the benefits of AI technology, Weston's dishes were bathing themselves in a cold water bath in the sink that needed to be washed up from the previous night. There was also a mucky ring around the bath that needed addressing, but Weston liked to put household chores on the back burner, something that would likely not impress his late wife. But she was not here to snap him out of his bad habits that were quickly sneaking up on him like a bad smell. Weston and his wife had come to this quaint seaside town on the Pacific Peninsula to enjoy their retirement together. They had left their busy lives in Houston, Texas behind, as if shedding an old winter coat to embrace a more laid-back, leisurely lifestyle, and had moved here over 6 months ago. Weston's beloved wife Jo had then fortuitously had a sudden unexpected heart attack and died very suddenly, and now he was left all on his own, so getting up early in the morning to enjoy a walk across the beach was helping him to heal from the sad, devastating loss of his wife that had hit him hard. Suffice to say, all his dreams about their retirement that they'd hoped to share together had been swallowed up rudely by the quicksand of disappointment and regret. If anything, Weston had been completely sure that he'd be the one that would die before his wife did. The thought had brought him a huge measure of comfort. But now he was left alone to paddle along the ocean of life with only one oar, without his beloved wife at his side, who he missed desperately, and it was a daily laborious battle of overcoming a lugubrious melancholia, without her around, that was beginning to fester in his heart like a fast-growing mould, which was far from healthy for him. Living here in this minimalistic house, with its unsympathetic, cold-blooded heart on his very own, was not going to be easy, as his wife's absence from his life had almost certainly left a vacuous hollow that could never ever be filled. Weston's big black mixed-breed dog Trout helped make life a lot more bearable for him. He was as large as a mountain dog that he'd rescued from a shelter in Houston 3 years ago, and had been handed over to the shelter only because the owner said the dog had never stopped growing and was far too big for her tiny apartment, so she had sadly had to give him up, with great regret. So on this unassuming, rather unremarkable morning, where Weston thought the routines of the day would be very much the same, Trout came bounding into the bedroom with a spirited ebullience, and began to nuzzle Weston excitedly with his affectionate slobbery wet kisses. He looked at Weston expectantly through his eager dark eyes, as if to say, "What are you waiting for? Are we not going out?" He began, thumping his tail so hard that his daughter's ladybug alarm clock began to rattle precariously on the nightstand. He didn't want that to break. "Steady now, boy," said Weston. "Calm down. That tail of yours is a lethal weapon. It's treacherous, it is." Weston groaned. All right, Trout. I get the message. I'll get up," he said, feeling a rising pressure from his dog to get moving. Trout was the kind of dog that could bring on an attack of the gills, like an outbreak of measles, if you were to sit on your laurels doing nothing. "Just give me a moment, will you, Trout, to get dressed, and we'll be out of here, I promise." Trout barked appreciatively, as he knew his owner's routines like the back of his big black furry paws. He sat down on his haunches, watching Weston shuffle around his wardrobe to retrieve a long pair of khaki shorts and a white polo-neck shirt. On the other side of his sliding wardrobe were his wife's sorry clothes that Weston had not had the heart to hand over to a charity shop yet. He liked the presence of Jo's things. It meant he felt she was still around. Letting go of her things would mean she had really gone, and Weston was not ready to let her go, not just yet. Weston hurried into the bathroom to brush his teeth. Trout trotted behind him, watching his owner's every move, which was oddly comforting for Weston. He liked the fact that Trout's very large, cheerful presence in his home made him feel like he was not completely on his own. Weston soberly studied his gaunt reflection in the mirror, lathering his chin with shaving foam, and skillfully running a razor across his chin. His wife Jo had hated facial hair or beards of any kind, with a passion, and now she was gone it had not even crossed his mind to grow one. Shaving had become a routine, that it would have felt strange to abandon the habit. He stared at his reflection through the mirror and realized that his skin looked pale and ghost-like, his face most certainly thin and gaunt. He had lost a significant amount of weight after his wife had died, which was hardly surprising, given that his desire to eat had floated away like a dandelion seed on the wind. He was still struggling to regain his repressed appetite. It would seem his 2 adult children, who lived in Houston, were bullying him to start eating again. His daughter Kirsty kept telling him how dreadful he looked these days on their video chats together. She had never been the type of person to keep her opinions to herself, and was inclined to bully him a little. But that was because she was a 7th-grade teacher, and was very accomplished at telling people what to do. "Dad," she said, her mouth turning downwards into a scowl, "you look absolutely dreadful. I'm sorry, but I have to tell you the truth." At that Weston had laughed. "Kirsty, you've never been the one to mince your words," he'd said to her. "So go ahead. Tell me exactly what you're thinking." She had tutted under her breath. "If Mum could see you now, Dad, she'd be so disappointed with you. You're not taking care of yourself. I'm sorry, Dad, I have to say it. I'm not being unkind. I'm being brutally honest. You are really in a bad way. Look at your eyes and the hollows in your cheeks. I bet you're not eating, are you? She said, groaning. Dad, you've got to start eating, even if you have to force yourself to do so. I'm trying to eat, Kirsty. Really I am. It's not easy. I've lost my appetite, he told her. Dad, it's not healthy for you not to eat, she had insisted. You really need to make an effort, or I'll have to move in with you for a while and force the food down your gullet myself. I can't have you fading away on me. Mum would never forgive me if I allowed that to happen. You've got your own kids and your husband to worry about, Kirsty. I can't have you worrying about me all the time. I'm fine, I promise you, and I'm working at the eating. As Weston paid closer attention to his unsettling reflection in the mirror, he realized his daughter Kirsty was absolutely right. He didn't look at all healthy. That's what grief did to you. He looked emaciated, withdrawn, and almost waxy, as if he was half alive. His silvery hair had got considerably thinner in recent months, probably due to the lack of nourishment in his body, that was now mirroring back to him the sadness in his soul. Before long, Weston had left the house, following 3 or 4 concrete steps down to the beach, Trout leading the way. The horizon was scattered with the golden prisms of light, and the round disk of the sun could be seen rising over the water. It was a cool, invigorating morning, with a slight, rather tingling chill in the air. It would surely warm up later. The beach was quiet, without a solitary soul in sight. Despite the faint scribbles of pretty yellow light that bathed the horizon, it was still significantly dark outside. The morning was making that ambiguous transition from darkness into light, with a lingering struggle, almost as if an invisible battle was going on behind the scenes, with a lighting engineer who was having problems with the staging effects. Very often the silence was broken to the screeching, squawking sounds of the gulls, who were up and about so annoyingly early this morning, and there were 3 of them on the edge of the beach, making fast work over a couple of dead fish, gifted to them by the tide. They were scuffling over the fish. Once Weston got to the bottom of the steps, he abandoned his flip-flops eagerly, close enough to the house so he'd find them again on his return journey. He proceeded to walk across the beach. The beach sand was cold to the touch, but he enjoyed the texture of its gentle roughness as it sloughed against his bare feet. Like a luxurious exfoliant at a beauty spa, he was thoroughly enjoying the lovely feeling of the cool breeze nuzzling against his cheeks. He did privately wish he'd brought a windbreaker along with him, to wear over his shirt, as after his recent weight loss, he was a lot more sensitive to any chills in the air. He did briefly consider going back to the house to retrieve a windbreaker, but Trout was energetically charging along the beach with such a merry gusto. He didn't have the heart to go back to the house, as Trout would be so disappointed. Some sacrifices were well worth making, and besides, if Weston increased his walking pace, he'd surely soon warm up. Weston's regular walks on the beach had improved his fitness exponentially. In a trice he impulsively decided to step up the intensity of his pace and run after Trout, as Trout had his nose pinned to the beach sand. He seemed rather intrigued about something, almost as if he'd picked up an unusual scent on the wind that warranted investigation. Weston found himself charging down the long ribbon of beach, past the promenade, where there were a string of eclectic shops gathered together rather cosily, like a close group of gossiping friends. The shops conspicuously fringed the broad walk. There were a couple of clothes boutiques, a mystical shop selling dream catchers and interesting stones, an Italian restaurant called Big Mama's, the Ivy Leaf coffee shop, Bert's ice cream parlour, and a traditional pancake place called the Squidgy Maple, that sold the fluffiest pancakes you've ever tasted in your life. Soon Weston was running towards these islands of rocky outcrops at the far end of the beach, that were more wild and secluded, and stretched back into a woody area that boasted groves of tall, lofty trees. As Weston began to run, he felt his breathing intensify and his body warm up. and the energizing spirited run across the beach was satisfyingly invigorating. He began breathing furiously fast. His heart rate intensified, so he could feel it booming violently through his chest. It felt so good to be up and about this early. And the rest of the world was fast asleep, although there were indeed a couple of sailboats now out, seen on the horizon. But they were far enough away for Weston to feel as if all that was up and about right now was just one man and his dog. He was surprised to find he was thoroughly enjoying himself this morning, and laughing at Trout's enthusiasm, which was contagious. His dog bounded across the beach, leaving a trail of his paws indented in the sand. The waves crashed and galloped rambunctiously towards the shore, like a vast army of white stallions. The ocean seemed to have a frantic energy this morning, as it appeared to be roaring furiously and doggedly purging out a plethora of seaweed that was strewn across the sand, along with a bountiful discharge of broken seashells that were scattered liberally everywhere, none that appeared to be intact, which was a pity, as Weston rather liked to collect shells. Trout seemed industriously focused on a smell that had grabbed his attention. He nuzzled the air with his nose, as if drawing close to his quarry. Trout had a remarkable sense of smell, but then again, most dogs do. On one occasion, when Weston had returned from a grocery shop, he'd left the shopping in his trunk while attending to his phone call from his son Russell. It would seem that he found Trout sitting at the trunk end of the car, barking at all the shopping, as if to say, "Something in there smells really good." When Weston opened the trunk, Trout had dived unabashedly into the car, darting like a bullet towards one of the bags, pulling out a package in his jaws containing a large fillet steak. "No, that's not for you, Trout. Put it down, boy," Weston had scolded him, wagging a warning finger at him. But Trout had taken no notice of Weston. He knew his master had a heart made out of marshmallows, and he'd used this knowledge to his full advantage. Weston began chasing after Trout, who was far too fast for him. His dog eagerly scratched open the packaging with his paw, retrieving the fillet steak, gobbling it all up with such appreciative gusto that Weston had tried very hard to be angry with the dog. But the incident had been so hilariously funny and so utterly charming, it was impossible to scold that big bundle of mischief. Not that his wife would have approved, or even agreed for that matter. That Weston had keeled over in laughter, and laughed so much that he had stitches in his side, and it began to hurt, as if he'd done hundreds of sit-ups. How could you possibly reprimand a dog for eating a fillet steak, when people paid good money to experience belly laughs as good as this, by booking tickets for an expensive comedy show? Having said that, Weston had been completely dazzled by Trout's incredible sense of smell, and how out of dozens of shopping bags he had accurately pinpointed the exact bag containing the fillet steak. One thing was for certain, Trout would make an excellent drug recovery dog, the kind you see in airports sniffing all the luggage on the conveyor belts. Maybe Trout had missed his vocation in life. Certainly it seemed this morning that a smell had intrigued him from a long way away, and Trout seemed more preoccupied than ever and excited by a scent, more so than the fillet steak incident, which was oddly bizarre. What could be more interesting to a dog than a fillet steak? Weston wondered if he'd picked up the scent of somebody else's dog on the beach. Weston had thought that no one was up and about now. It was still far too early for even the bold, fanatical sports enthusiast to be taking a jog down the beach. Weston knew for many, even with the soft blue sky beginning to creep over the horizon, it was still a tad too early for people to be up and about. Trout unabashedly rocketed towards the rocky outcrop at the end of the beach, where large sculptural boulders interspersed with tiny little rock pools containing sea anemones and starfish were clustered together like a large island of flattened stones. He began to bark excitedly at something. Then he sat down on his haunches and stared up at this big, black, ambiguous thing. Weston squinted as he tried to focus on this towering blob of black standing before him, with hair not unlike his dog's. "What the hell is that?" he wondered. He couldn't see clearly, Weston remembered he wasn't wearing his glasses for close-up scrutiny. He had found close-up he didn't see terribly well. His eyesight had badly deteriorated in recent months, especially after his wife's fortuitous death, and so he took his glasses with him everywhere he went, in the event he needed to study something close up more intently. Gone was his 20/20 vision he had enjoyed so much as a younger man. Weston pulled out his glasses from his pocket in the back of his long khaki shorts and perched them on his nose, peering up at this big towering form that stood before him. What the hell is that? He wondered. He looked like an old man struggling to read the tiny small print on the back of a bottle of pills. It was a battle to focus on this 9-foot blob of long flowing dark hair, with a distinctive bullet-shaped head and ponderous shoulders. He gasped in astonishment as he focused on this massive thing, built like an army tank. The critter was staring back at him through yellow-brown eyes, not flinching or even moving a muscle. It would be easy to believe it wasn't even there. Weston was so sure he was not seeing right. Maybe his glasses were filthy, badly smudged. So now he was seeing distorted images that were tricking his imagination. He hurriedly removed his glasses from his eyes and began vigorously cleaning them on the fabric of his shirt, replacing them on his eyes again. But then he knew what he was seeing was not a smudge nor a blur on his lens, but a Titanic-sized male Bigfoot. You've got to be kidding! Did these things even exist? Or was he actually back at home in his bed, dreaming this? If that was indeed the case, this was a very lucid, explicit dream, but not an unpleasant one at that. Weston knew that this was no dream. He was too befuddled, too astounded to react with fear. When you experience something so strange, so idiosyncratic, so outlandish, it can catapult you out of your reality like a stone in a slingshot. You think to yourself that whatever you're perceiving, it just can't be real. No, it's not. And when something is not real, all fear is eclipsed and expunged. So why would you be afraid of something that does not exist? It would seem for Weston he was having a hard time making sense of what he was seeing. The Bigfoot, who stood there like an ice statue, was giving Weston permission to study him, it would seem. In a trice, the smouldering silence was soon broken, when the Bigfoot spoke to Weston in a strange language that miraculously melted into English in his head. Mortali, hilatana, quolopasi, ha shakilatina, ho pilasi. Get over it, the creature said. I am real. There are more pressing matters at stake that you need to attend to as a matter of urgency. Tolati katwasila holapi. I thought you would never come. Kolopila. She's over there. The Bigfoot was pointing towards a large lump of rags on the beach, tangled up in seaweed. Weston gawked at the Bigfoot, as if trying to make sense of the unorthodox fact that the creature had actually spoken to him in an ancient language that he actually comprehended. How was that even remotely possible? Weston had struggled to learn French at school when he was a young man, and yet the words the Bigfoot spoke and their meanings just floated into his head with a fluidness that took him aback. The Bigfoot continued to point to the bundle of rags on the beach and said, Poloti, atta. You need to be quick about it. Weston nodded, although he did not comprehend why this Bigfoot appeared to be getting excited about a bunch of old rags that had washed up on the beach. But he would humour the Titanic-sized beast, who clearly wanted him to examine the rags for some profound, rather bizarre reason. Weston ran towards the bundle of rags, with Trout bounding at his side, thrashing his tail enthusiastically and barking merrily. Weston turned around to look at the Bigfoot, but the creature had all but disappeared. How could he have vanished so quickly? Where the hell had he gone? For a brief second, Weston was disappointed. He didn't want the Bigfoot to go anywhere, for reasons he could not explain, but he kind of liked the outlandish creature, that it seemed extraordinarily intelligent and very human. Weston had been astonished that the Bigfoot's face reminded him of an old school friend of his, with Native American ancestry. Maybe it was the high cheekbones, the hooded eyes, that gave him the impression, but the Bigfoot looked like an Indian warrior, built like a giant, covered in hair. Weston had not felt any fear of the Bigfoot due to the creature's obvious emotional intelligence. The creature had been benevolent, and even Trout, who initially barked at the creature, had sat down and stared at the Bigfoot with doe eyes, as if he knew the Bigfoot was to be respected. Trout did not view the Bigfoot as strange, but like a large human being wearing a thick furry coat in summer. Trout had never behaved like that with Weston, when he had shamelessly stolen that fillet steak, but he had looked up at the Bigfoot as if the creature was some kind of dog whisperer, like Caesar Milan, who works miracles with dogs with his masterful techniques and intrinsic understanding of dog behaviour. Weston tried to focus on the bag of rags that had washed up on the beach, that was surprisingly dry. What the hell is this, he thought, peering over the bundle to study it more closely. Weston suddenly realised that this was some kind of mannequin, like the ones you see in women's boutiques on display. What on earth was it doing here, washed up on the beach like this? All of a sudden, the pale, waxy mannequin flinched under Weston's gentle prodding, and he almost jumped out of his skin with a start. This thing was alive! It was a young lady. In a trice, Weston was leaning over the woman and feeling for a pulse. It was so faint, but she was only just alive. Trout was beginning to lick the woman's face, like a flavourful popsicle. "Trout, get back here," said Weston. "Get back here. Come on, boy. Leave her alone. Good dog." "Can you hear me?" he asked the young lady. "Can you hear me?" The woman's face was covered in sea sand. Her eyes were shut, but a faint, muted mumble came from the back of her throat, as if she was struggling to say something. Weston wonders what the hell she's doing on the beach like this. He rummages around in the pocket of his khaki shorts, which are surprisingly deep, which is why he likes to wear them. He finds his wallet, his penknife, and then the cold metal of his cell phone. He pulls it out of his pocket, relieved to see it has a good signal. "Sorry about my dog," he says to the woman. "He's harmless. Trout, get back here, boy. Stop licking the lady. Don't you worry, dear. I'm calling 911. Help will be here shortly, I can promise you of that." It was only a month ago when Weston had called the very same emergency number for his wife, and now he was doing it again with trembling fingers. 911? What's your emergency? "Yes, hello. It's a young woman here. She's washed up on the beach. Yes, she's alive, but only just. Her pulse is faint, but she did try to speak to me. Yes, I will stay with her. The name is Weston Taylor. I'm with a large black dog called Trout on the beach. See you shortly." Eyeless account. The dark, paralysing, cold, unfriendly water, devoid of even a trickle of light, plunges me deeper and deeper into its murky, tenebrific depths, swallowing me whole, as if I'm caught up in a Titanic-sized gullet of a whale, from which there seems no escape. I'm dropping down so fast, as if there are cement blocks attached to both of my feet, dragging me deeper and deeper into the water. I'm like a miniature human-sized version of the legendary Titanic, slipping to the depths of the ocean. I cannot let the water take me down, so I fight as hard as I possibly can, with every last bit of strength that is left in my body. I have become like a punctured balloon, fast running out of gas, and fading quickly. I kick and flail as hard as I possibly can, like a seal reaching for a pocket of air in the ice, in order to take that desperate gasp of air again. I splash furiously. The bubbles and the sounds of popping air are so prominent to me. I manage to rise up to the surface for a brief moment, gasping and spluttering. As I take a deep breath, I pummel the waters frantically with my arms and legs, desperately trying to keep my head above water, with doggy paddle-like movements. I'm swallowing lots of salt water. I sigh with momentary relief as I see the inky sky stretched out above my head, and the pretty trickles of waning moonlight, casting soft prisms of light over the surface of the water. It is incredibly cold, so cold. It's freezing, and the cold is stinging my body, as if I've been pierced by hundreds of blue-bottle jellyfish. It's excruciatingly painful. My body stiffens and becomes numb, as if all the heat has left my body, and the last ashes of warmth within me are finally beginning to fade away. I can feel that I'm dying, but I need to kick as much as I possibly can, to energize those fading embers inside me, to keep the fire inside me burning, so I can try to keep warm. But I'm fighting a losing, joyless battle that has extinguished the candle wick of my hope. Even the clothes I'm wearing are turning against me, as the weight of the material is dragging me underneath the waves. I keep talking to myself, encouraging myself, but it's so useless. I have to give up. I have to surrender to the waves. I don't have much choice, and I'm so cold. But another voice steps over the threshold of my thoughts. It's a strange, commanding male voice. I've never heard the voice before. It's persuading me not to give up. I'm sure the voice is lying to me. It has to be. How can I possibly win a battle like this, against these furious waves? How did I even end up in the water like this? The icy blackness of the cruel, unforgiving water executes its grave judgment on all who brazenly venture out into the deep like this, who foolishly challenge to take her on. The water swaddles me on every side, with merciless frosty hands. My skin is blue from the cold. I cannot feel my body any more. I'm so cold, so cold. I've never felt cold like this before. It rattles my bones to the core, expunging them of all their warmth. Death seems like a beautiful choice for me now, than continuing to fight this losing battle, of which there are only losses in this fruitless endeavour, and no winners. The power of the formidable ocean has taken many a sorry soul down to its treacherous watery grave. Why should it be any different for me? What makes me so special that I can be saved? How many ships have been lost out at sea over the years, and the bodies of those on board have not overcome the treacherous waters of the deep, especially in unforgiving icy conditions like this, where the ocean is so treacherously cold. Why should I fare any better? Ostensibly in warmer waters you might have a fighting chance of survival, but out here the cold is an adverse enemy that can take you out furiously fast. I cry out to God, although I've never been religious, but when death draws ever closer and closer, you'll turn to anything to help you, anything that might hear your cries. I can feel death's dark claws digging into me. I begin to ponder if there just might be a God who could potentially save me, help me. But if there is, why would he bother with me? For a moment it seems like a good idea to just give up and surrender to my watery fate. But the words that come out of my mouth are contradictory to that. They're not that eager to give up. It seems that there is still some fight left in me. I cry out, "Help! Help! Please help me!" in a tiny, small voice. Then, like a swift, magical answer to prayer, something profound happens that I can't explain. I'm not even sure what it is, but it's big, it's mighty, with forceful arms that jerk me forward. I feel as if I'm being thrown onto a warm, carpeted floor, and being propelled steadily through the water by something with a powerful motor, but oddly it gives off no mechanical discharge. I'm breathing above the water, being cradled securely into place by a very furry safety belt that pins me to a soft, wet carpet of robust flooring. What is happening to me? I must be on the floor of a motorboat of some kind, with a silent engine, that is plunging through the waves with powerful, forceful thrusts that rocket through the water, leaving me in no doubt that this boat has a formidable, very sturdy engine, for it moves swiftly, efficiently, and gracefully through the water with ease. The boat I'm on seems to be breathing, moving beneath me, and as far as I know, boats don't breathe like this. It's a strange, rather idiosyncratic experience for me that makes no sense at all. Finally, the boat rises out of the water like a man. I find myself being lowered very gently and carefully to the ground. Where am I wonder. I'm no longer covered by water. What a relief! I struggle to open the slits of my eyes that are crusted over with sea salt, so heavy from exhaustion and fatigue. All I want to do is to fall fast asleep. I'm fighting the tiredness as if that is now my enemy. I feel exhausted, like a tank of petrol that has run dry, so I can't move a muscle anymore, even if I want to. But I'm shivering with the cold as my wet clothes cling to me unapologetically, keeping my core temperature at a dangerous level that could easily invite hypothermia to steal my life from me. I try to make sense of what I'm seeing. What is that, I wonder, as I try to open my eyes? I know people hallucinate when they're suffering from hypothermia. Is that what I'm doing? Is that what's happening to me? I can't be sure. I observe a huge towering blob of black. It's covered in wet hair, standing before me, with seemingly worried yellow eyes. I notice a furrow developing between his brows, as if he's perplexed. What is this creature? What is he? I can't make sense of him, but the yellow eyes are incredibly distinctive, but at the same time, he's benevolent and very, very kind. His eyes are not to be feared. They are warm like two light bulbs giving off a pleasing heat. But I have to be hallucinating. Surely this thing I am seeing cannot be real. The next thing I know is that this huge creature is cradling me to his chest, and the delicious warmth of his body filters right through my icy clothes, thawing me from the inside out. It's such a good feeling, such a relief. I feel warmth swaddling me. He smells of sea salt and seaweed. I can feel my body thawing, the iciness leaving my body. I drift in and out of consciousness, feeling the blissful waves of warmth lovingly enfold me. It appears to be sucking away the wet of my clothes, like one of those hand dryers you get in a communal public bathroom. A voice drifts into my head. I sent help on the wings of the gal, and in the siren of their screams. Someone is coming for you. They will be here very soon. Help will not be denied you. It is not your time. Your end will never be in the water. The warmth that enveloped me finally leaves me, and the arms that cradled me have gone. I have no idea where the thing that cradled me so lovingly has gone to. I want it to please come back, but I have no sense of it any more. But I'm not as cold as I once was, which is a huge relief. But I'm not out of the woods yet. I know death is still a possibility for me. I feel her dark, hungry shadow hovering over me like a vulture, looking for an opportune moment to seize me. But her time has not come yet. But she waits in hopeful expectation, as if my death is a given. I can feel my willpower to keep fighting is beginning to flail. I don't care any more. I really don't. But that annoying, resolute voice keeps returning to my head, telling me, it's not your time. I'm trying to argue with the voice, but I'm so tired of fighting. Even arguing is too much like hard work. I just want to give up. I want to let go. I want to float up into the clouds to be one with all that is. My throat is dry, my lips parched, my head aching. But my clothes are miraculously dry around my body. They still cling to me. I cannot think clearly or even coherently, even though I try desperately to gather my thoughts, like a child's glass marbles. But when I try to gather them together, they just roll away from my grasp and scatter. I hear the squawk of seagulls above my head, soaring in the skies. They are normally annoyingly obtrusive, but today they're oddly reassuring, even comforting. When I do manage to half open the slits of my eyes, all I see is a fuzzy glaze of a yellowing sky spilling over the water, and the golden disk of a rising sun, which suggests the morning has just been birthed. If only the sun would come out now. I urgently need her warmth all over my body. It would be so greatly appreciated, gladly receive. I'm so tired, so tired. I could sleep for an eternity, and it wouldn't be enough. I cough and splutter. My throat burns. It's as scratchy as sandpaper. My body is now throbbing, and everything aches, and everything is so stiff. I feel so close, yet so far away. All of a sudden I hear the rush of fast-moving feet. Something warm is snuffling all over me, licking my face with a warm, wet tongue. A dog begins to bark. I hear a man's voice. "Trout, come back. Don't do that. Get back, boy." I sense a form hovering over me. I know I'm being studied, as a face looms into my field of vision. I notice a nose, a mouth, concerned-looking blue eyes, framed by a pair of lightweight spectacles, and silvery hair that fringes a thin face. Someone is leaning over me, feeling my pulse. "Are you all right? Can you hear me?" says a male voice. I try to respond, but I cannot. I'm opening and closing my mouth. All I taste is salt and bitter bile. My mouth is encrusted with beach sand, like chicken nuggets coated in breadcrumbs. Nothing comes out of my mouth. Instead, it's just a strange, raspy gurgle. What is happening to me? I feel as if I'm trapped in my head, unable to look outside of myself, like an ungainly lump of jelly washed upon the beach that children kick with their flip-flops. The stranger pats me gently on the shoulders. His muted voice breaks through my panic. I try to latch on to his words like a lifeline of hope, but the coming words slip and slide away, a flow of sound that I cannot fully or entirely comprehend or even decipher. "I'm calling for help. Don't you worry, my love. Everything's going to be fine," says a warm voice, taking my cold hand in his warm one. "Don't you worry. I've called the ambulance. They'll be here in a minute." I sigh with relief, knowing that help is at long last on its way. After a while I hear the sound of muted voices, rolling in and out of my consciousness, like the background noise of a radio. A wash of sound that tries to break through to me, but I can't make out the words. "She's over here," says a man's voice. "She's not looking good, I'm afraid. I can barely feel her pulse. I think she's been in that icy water, although oddly enough, her tangle of clothes appears to be dry. But I think she's fading fast." He lowers his voice. "I'm not sure she's going to make it. Her skin is blue from the cold." "Don't worry, sir. We'll do our best to help her," says a female voice. "Your name is?" "My name is Weston Taylor, and this is my dog Trout." "You found her like this on the beach, sir?" "Yes, I did. She was pale and waxy. At first I thought she was a mannequin." "Thanks for calling us, sir," says the voice. "You may well have saved her life." I feel a warm blanket being thrown over my body. Someone is leaning over me. "Can you hear me?" comes a woman's firm voice. Her breath is warm on my face. I can smell traces of coffee on her breath. "Hello," comes the voice. "Can you try and open your eyes for me? Can you look at me? Can you see my finger? What hand am I holding up?" Left or right hand? Which finger? I struggle to open my eyes, but I think I manage to because the woman keeps saying, "Well done, that's good. Can you tell me your name?" I find myself staring blankly into kind chocolate-coloured eyes. "Can you tell me your name?" The voice repeats. I try to answer her question, but once again my doggedly unfaithful voice refuses to oblige the earnest requests from the woman. My mind has gone completely blank. It even hurts to think. I don't know what my name is. I couldn't give her a name even if I wanted to. Instead, I gurgle as salty water mixed with spittle trickles down my mouth. "Can you hear me?" asks the woman again. I manage a nod. "Good girl," she says, patting me gently on the shoulder. "Do you know where you are?" I manage to say the word beach. Beach. That's right, you're on a beach. Can you tell me how you feel physically? Are you hurting anywhere? I'm tired. Tired. Have you been in the water? Yes. Good girl. Good girl, you're doing incredibly well. I'm proud of you. Are you hurt at all? My head. My throat is sore. I'm cold, I croak. "We're getting you help. You'll be out of here in a stretcher any second," she tells me. I now feel afraid, because I feel like a broken doll, and I'm not sure that being moved is actually a good idea for me. What if it really hurts when they lift my body? Everything passes in a dreamy, hazy, ambiguous blur. I'm lifted onto a stretcher, and thankfully, despite an aching body and a throbbing head, a scratching throat, I don't experience any sharp pain. That's got to be a good sign, surely. The man, calling himself Weston with his dog Trout, hovers over me for a moment. "I hope you get better soon, young lady. The hospitals are very good. They'll sort you out." I hear his dog barking, as if echoing his sentiments. I would smile if it didn't hurt so very much. I can feel myself being ferried away on the stretcher across the beach, and a couple of early morning beachgoers are garrulously enjoying a good gossip at my expense. "What happened here?" I hear a woman's voice. "You don't think she's going to die, do you? Why was she on the beach? Do you think she was actually in the water? Do you see how blue her face is? Do you know how cold that water is? If you're in it long enough, it'll kill you." "I'm sure she couldn't have been in the water, surely. I mean, she was on the beach, but I mean, it doesn't look like her clothes are wet." I'm now in the ambulance. People are attending to me. Voices are assuring me, drifting in and out of my consciousness like passing ships in the night. But I keep floating in and out of my blurry state. But I pick up snippets of conversation along the way. "I'd like to know what she was doing on the beach. Her clothes look like they're wet, but she appears to be dry. It's very odd, isn't it? Why was she tangled up in seaweed? That's what I want to know. I spoke to the man who found her on the beach. He thought she was a mannequin. You don't think someone attacked her, do you? There's a large contusion on her head, as if she succumbed to a big whack. Poor thing. Do you think she's going to be all right?" "I've seen a lot worse than this. And they pulled through," came a male voice. "As long as we keep up her core body temperature, she'll be fine." The voices continue to sway in and out of my consciousness, merging with the crunch of footsteps and the shuffle of people moving things around, in the ambulance, fiddling with various devices. The walls are pale yellow in colour, and it smells strongly of disinfectant, which is markedly pronounced. I'm sitting propped up in a hospital bed in the accident and emergency department. I'm waiting for a doctor to see me. My clothing is removed. I'm wearing a hospital gown. I'm dry and warm. I've already been seen by a nurse who's taken my blood pressure. The curtain has been drawn around the bed. The bottom area is wide open. I see a teenager boy with a plastered leg lying supported above him in some kind of a harness. He looks up at me through dark, curious eyes. I meet his eyes, but he flushes with embarrassment and hurriedly looks away. I try to make sense of my surroundings. I know I'm in hospital, and I know I was found on a beach by a man called Weston with his dog Trout. I remember being in the water. I remember drowning. I remember being dragged out of the water. But everything else is ambiguously foggy, like when you look through a steamed-up mirror in your bathroom, and you can see not a thing, even if you wipe the steam away, because it reappears again and makes everything foggy. I hear nurses efficiently striding past, calling out instructions to other healthcare workers. It would seem I'm not the pivotal point of their focus or concern, which is a great relief. I sense that the danger I was in must have at least passed. Perhaps I'm going to be all right after all, even though my head is throbbing violently, almost as if someone has hit me in the back of the head with an ice pick. I can hear the clutter of medical equipment and trolleys being wheeled across the floor backwards and forwards. I hear a male voice getting ever closer. He stops to talk to a nurse. "The one from the beach," I hear him say. I then see the doctor venturing into my line of sight. He's a man in his 50s or 60s. He's wearing a white coat with a stethoscope draped casually around his neck like a woman's scarf. He has dark hair that does not hint of even a trespassing grey hair, but his crepey skin and the lines around his eyes, a soft feathering of sorts, with sagging jowls, give his age away. He studies me for a brief moment through his earnest eyes. He gives me a warm, friendly smile. "Hello there. I'm Dr. Nate Walensky." He picks up his clipboard at the end of the bed and moves towards me. "So how are you feeling, young lady?" he asks me. "I felt better," I say, attempting to be humorous. "I just feel a bit odd. My head, it's throbbing violently, and I feel dizzy, disorientated, very tired." "Can you tell me your name?" asks the doctor. I open my mouth to answer, but like on the beach, nothing comes out of my mouth, even as I try to speak. I suddenly feel dreadfully self-conscious. "I'm sorry, doctor," I say, emitting an embarrassed laugh that sounds more like a cat's tormented yowl. I can't remember. I can't remember." "That's all right," said the doctor. "Can you tell me where you live?" "Where do I live?" I say out loud. I'm trying to think. It's on the tip of my tongue. It'll be with me in a second." I shrug my shoulders. "Sorry, I can't remember," I say apologetically, "but I'm sure it'll come back to me in any minute." I then look up at Dr. Walensky in alarm. "Why can't I remember?" I ask. "Is there something wrong with me?" Tears spill down my cheeks, which I shamefully brush away. The doctor looks at me through sympathetic eyes. "You've had a shock, young lady, but you're in a very good place now. You're in good hands with us. We'll take great care of you. I think you're suffering from a bout of retrograde amnesia, but with any luck your memory will soon return. I will be running a few tests on you." I can feel my eyes longing to close. I want the doctor to leave me now, so I can surrender to sleep, but the doctor is speaking to me again. "I need you to sit up. I want to listen to your heart and lungs, if I may." "Of course," I say, obliging the doctor's request with a measure of reluctant unwillingness. "I just want to go back to sleep." Dr. Walensky removes the stethoscope from around his neck, placing it on my back and on my chest. "Can you remember swimming in the sea?" he asks me. "You were in the water, were you not?" I remember, yes, I was in the water, but I don't know why I was actually there. I remember the water, it was so cold, the bubbles. I remember drowning. I remember being pulled out of the water, lying on the beach. The doctor frowns and says, "But you don't know how you got into the water. You have a nasty contusion on your head that suggests that someone might have hit you very hard. I'm going to do some CT scans on your head to look at your brain. Do you think someone was trying to harm you, or possibly attempting to drown you? Can you remember? Maybe they thought the cold water would ultimately kill you. In truth, if I am being frank with you, it's amazing that you're not suffering from hypothermia. That water is a killer. You couldn't have been in it for very long, even if it might have felt like an eternity. My eyes flood with tears when the doctor suggests someone might have wanted to harm me. The trouble is, I can't remember anything. I know not if I have any friends or foes, because I can't remember anything, or anyone, or even why I was in that water. Can you tell me what you do remember? Well, I was numb. The water was dragging me under. There were bubbles, popping sounds. I thought I was dying at one point. It was so cold. But something big and black with bright yellow eyes saved me. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. At first I thought it was some strange motorboat, because it carried me on its back. I'm not sure what it was, but it had a human face, and it was 9 foot tall, with powerful arms. It warmed me to its chest, cradling me in its arms like a baby, and then it just went away. And that's when a man called Weston Taylor and his dog Trout appeared on the beach. That's all I remember. The doctor is giving me funny looks, as if he thinks I'm slightly delusional, dreaming up fictitious creatures like this with yellow eyes, rescuing me from icy cold, frigid waters. But I know it was no dream. The doctor gingerly maintains a polite expression on his face, and if he's shocked by my strange revelations, he hides it well. Well, it's a good job this Western fellow found you on the beach and called the ambulance as quickly as he did, because we were able to get your core temperature up. The water in these parts is icy cold and can kill you if you're not careful. So if you have been seeing creatures with yellow eyes, it's not surprising. One of the side effects of getting very cold is hallucinations. I'm concerned about a possible lung infection here, so we'll have to keep you in for a few days at the very least. I think we need to keep an eye on you, and I'm a little concerned about that contusion you sustained on your head. Is it serious? I asked. And my condition, I mean, Doctor. No, it's just a precautionary measure on my part. Keeping you here at the hospital is what we will call precautionary. But if my instincts serve me well, you're going to do just fine. You've just had a nasty shock. Being thrust into icy cold water can shock the entire system physically, emotionally, and even spiritually. We'll put you on an IV drip, as you are very dehydrated from swallowing all that salt water. You need lots of fluid. I shudder as I unwillingly digest the uncomfortable weight of what Dr. Walensky is saying. I'm going to spend a few days here, being monitored by the doctors, but I don't know who I am, where I'm from, and why I ended up on the beach in the first place, or drowning in the ocean, more to the point. Worse still, Dr. Walensky has hinted at the possibility of foul play as the reason why I was in the water in the first place. And supposing he's right, supposing someone was trying to harm me or even kill me, I don't remember anything at all, beyond my dreadful struggle in the water. Why can't I remember what happened? I may not know who I am, but I'm not stupid, nor am I foolish enough to take a swim in such disturbingly chilly water just for the fun of it. So how did I come to be in that water in the first place? My account of my bizarre rescue has surely affirmed to Dr. Walensky that I'm suffering from delusions, or that I'm lightly as mad as a March hare. If I didn't get into that water on my own accord, someone put me there, someone intent on harming me. But why? Yet despite the kaleidoscope of my tangled and shattered thoughts, the one thing I know with certainty is that I was rescued by a big black hairy thing with yellow eyes and a human face. I knew he cared about me, and it was when he cradled me to keep me warm in his overlong arms and rocked me like a baby, and commiserated with my plight, and told me in my head that everything was going to be all right. I know I wasn't imagining things. He was huge, I was tiny in his grasp, swaddled by a great big body that gave off such an incredible amount of heat. This thing, whatever it was, had fortuitously arrived on the scene after I cried out to God. I'd never believed in God. Maybe he was an angelic being of some kind. Who says angels have to have the stereotype halos and large white wings? It was true when that great big man like hairy giant held me in his arms. I felt as if I was being enveloped in the loving arms of God. I remember the icy coldness leaving my body straight away, becoming so warm again. Not even the blanket that they put on me when I was in the ambulance was as warm as this thing was. But I dare not repeat any of this to Dr. Walensky, because he'll think that I require a brain transplant, if there is even such a thing. I know he's worried about my retrograde amnesia and the blow I seem to have taken on the head. Let's just say it probably accelerates his concern, especially if I continue talking about a fictitious dark creature with yellow eyes. I've been moved to a different ward. I'm so lucky that my bed is near the window and overlooks a courtyard with pretty flower beds, strewn with colourful spring flowers, manicured grass, and an arched pergola, draped in the whispers of purple wisteria, and a glorious tangle of climbing red roses. There are park benches painted in purple, scattered liberally across the yard, and patients wearing pyjamas with their visitors sitting on the benches or on wheelchairs and talking. I like to watch the comings and goings of people. It relieves my boredom. My brain is beginning to feel clearer and sharper, but I still cannot remember who I am, where I live, where I'm from, what I even do for a living, if indeed I do work. I cannot figure how old I actually am. I have a sense that I could be in my late teens or early 20s. I might still be at school or in college as a student. I know not the answers to these enigmatic, rather curious questions. So if somebody was wishing to harm me and had potentially tried to drown me, how could I possibly recognize who they are? How can I see them as a threat, as I don't even remember anything? Imagine if they come after me again, whoever they are. The thought leaves me filled with panic that brings on shivers even when I'm not cold. I've been placed on a drip, so that's why I guess I'm feeling a lot sharper in my head. But why is my estranged memory so aloof, so insouciant, so disconnected to me? It might be a help to actually know who I am, but the more I fight my ambiguous, uncooperative, foggy, fragmented blur inside me, the more it seems to mischievously float away from me, as if I'm chasing after a very naughty dog in the doggy park that refuses to be tethered to my lead. Dr. Walensky has told me to relax, to keep calm, and then in time my recollections should come marching back, like a gallant army of warriors that fills in all the blanks for me. This disabling amnesia is so not funny. I do not even recognize my own face that stares back at me in the mirror. Believe me, it's the weirdest feeling in the world, not even to know what you look like. I could see that I might have some Italian ancestry in me, but that's only a wide guess. It's the dark hair and the dark eyes that has led me to this outrageous conclusion, although I'm likely horribly wrong. It's certainly not set in stone that because I look this way, that I do actually have Italian ancestry. It's the not knowing who I am that is freaking me the hell out. Dr. Walensky keeps assuring me that my memory might have been hijacked by all the trauma I experienced. He did check my reflexes and balance, and did tests on me to check my thinking, judgment and memory, and the only thing that appears to be an issue is my long-term memory. The doctor's going to give me an MRI scan to shed some light on my condition, but I'm struggling to keep my panic under control, and not knowing who I am, my age, my history, is eating away at me like a worm in an apple. The doctor has warned me that I would be visited by 2 detectives who had various questions for me, so I would be expecting them any time soon. It was a man and a woman wearing plain clothes, but I knew at once they were detectives. They introduced themselves to me, and the woman stared at me through her dark eyes and said, "I understand from Dr. Walensky that you can't remember anything. Is that true?" I nod uncomfortably as I sit back on the hospital bed, studying the detectives through narrowing eyes. "I can't even remember who I am," I say suddenly, feeling so desperately sorry for myself. The tears trickle unabashedly down my cheeks. "You mustn't worry about that, and don't go upsetting yourself," said the policewoman kindly. "You have retrograde amnesia, I'm told, from Dr. Walensky. You've been exposed to a very stressful situation, which can shatter your memory. He believes it'll come back to you when your body has overcome the shock it's endured. How are you feeling?" she asked me. "I'm feeling a lot better. My throat is dry and scratchy. My mind is clearer and sharper. Certainly after the IV fluids, I'm thinking a lot clearer. But my head still hurts a great deal." "I'm sorry to hear that. I do understand you had a nasty thump to the head. Do you mind if I take a look?" "Of course I don't mind," I say, showing her the area on my head that was swollen. "It's this part over here." The detective examines my bump, running her fingers down my scalp, and she whistles. "That is nasty. I'm not going to lie to you. It's one hell of a bump. Do you think someone tried to hurt you?" she asked me. "Do you remember being hit on the head at all?" I clutch my scalp, rubbing my fingers over it. "It does hurt," I admit. "It's tender to the touch." I look at the detective through blank eyes that convey to her disappointed face that I sadly have no recollection of the event. If indeed someone did whack me over the head, I hope that we're barking up the wrong tree here, but I have a distinctive feeling that we're not, and that someone really did set out to hurt me, and possibly even kill me. I shrug my shoulders nonchalantly and take a sip of my bottled water to relieve my dry throat. "It's all right," said the officer obsequiously. "Do you remember anything at all? The doctor believes you were in the water for a short while, and that is very concerning as far as I'm concerned." "It's true. That's the part of the nightmare that I'd like to forget, and it's the only part that I actually seem to remember very vividly. I do recollect finding myself drowning in the ocean and wondering what on earth I was doing there. It was so surreal. It would have seemed like a dream if the water had not been so dreadfully cold." "You poor, poor thing," said the policewoman sympathetically, holding her male colleague's gaze. "It sounds like you were hit on the head. You came round from the shock when your body hit the ice-cold water of the ocean. I can't imagine how frightening that must have been for you. Dr. Walensky is amazed that you didn't suffer from hypothermia or end up with a nasty chest infection. He tells me your lungs are completely clear. That is very good news. You had a lucky escape, you did. It was obviously not meant to be your time, because believe me, it's a miracle you survived. I've known others that have not been so lucky in icy water like that. Perhaps you can tell me and my colleague here what you actually do remember about being in the water. I know it's awful to have to go over all that again, but it might trigger a memory of sorts." I was hesitant to do so, as my experience of drowning in the ocean was not something I wished to recall, and always seemed to bring me out in nervous hives. I told the officers all I knew, omitting of course the outlandish part of being rescued by a big black humanoid creature with yellow eyes and a human face. I figured out that they would take such an account with a great measure of scepticism, more so than Dr. Walensky himself. Ostensibly I knew that the police dealt with hard, cold facts. If I started rambling on and on about a yellow brick road and Alice in Wonderland-like fictitious creatures that had rescued me from the icy water, it wouldn't have gone down desperately well. In the circumstances, they would undoubtedly have thought that I had sustained even more than a nasty blow to the head. And I wouldn't blame them for concluding that, but I knew that the thing that rescued me from the ocean was real. "Do you know how you came to be washed up on the beach?" the officer asked me. "I must have swum to shore," I lied. "That's the only thing I can conclude." The policewoman looked at me intently. "Do you really not know who you are?" she asked me, as if she wanted to establish that a human being really was capable of waking up and not knowing who they are. "I really don't," I admitted bashfully. "I can't even remember what I look like. The face that I saw staring at me in the mirror gave me a shock this morning. I didn't recognize myself. That really freaked me out."
"That is brutal," said the male officer. "Really brutal. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you, young lady."
And the sympathy he extended towards me made me blurry with even more tears. I really was feeling very sorry for myself. "It's hard," I admitted. "Really hard. And very scary. I'm scared someone out there really wants me dead. And I don't even know who they are. Why can't I remember anything?" The female officer put an encouraging hand on me. She tapped my shoulder gently. "Don't beat yourself up about all this. I'm sure your memory will come back. But if someone did try to hurt you, we'll find them soon enough. In my experience, cockroaches have a nasty habit of reappearing from underneath the woodwork." "But what about the fact that I don't know who I am? How do I even go home when I don't even know where home is?" The police officer gives me an encouraging smile. "It's not a train smash," she assures me. "This is a small town. I'm sure someone is going to notice you're missing and contact us. We'll have to, of course, verify they are who they say they are. Failing that, we can go to the media, television, radio. But I'm sure it won't come to that," she said encouragingly. "The day is still young, but we'll get back to you as soon as we have more details. My only concern at this point in time is for your safety. As I keep saying, we'll need to investigate if someone did intend to harm you. What happened to you might have been accidental, but it could, of course, be nefarious. So the doctor has given us permission to allocate a police guard outside the ward to keep a close and vigilant watch over you for your own safety. Because if someone did try to harm you, and they discover you're in hospital still alive, they might want to harm you again, and before you remember them and report them to the police." "So you do think someone deliberately tried to harm me?" I asked the officers, unable to disguise the fear in my eyes.
"It's a precautionary measure we're taking," said the male officer. "It's a possibility. We don't want to take any chances. You could, of course, have taken a fall on some rocks, tumbled, slipped into the ocean. It happens. The trouble is that with your not remembering what happened, we need to make sure you're absolutely safe."
When the officers had left, a young armed man wearing a police uniform stood outside my ward. He was an ever reminder to me that my life might indeed be in danger, that someone out there wished to harm me. It was a day later that the officers returned, and I could see by the pleased expressions on their faces that they'd hit pay dirt and knew exactly who I was, and I was a little apprehensive of what they were about to reveal to me. "I'm guessing you know exactly why we've come to see you," she said with a broad grin on her face that lit up her chocolate brown eyes. Both officers pulled up chairs as they sat next to my bed. "How is the patient feeling today?" she asked me. "Do you have any memory returning?" "I guess it's a little bit too soon for that." "No, I'm afraid I don't," I say. "I'm hoping you're both going to tell me who I am." "Your name is Isla Holmes." "Isla," I say. "But that's not Italian, is it? You thought you were Italian?" "Well, you know, I've got dark hair, haven't I? Dark eyes, I thought."
"You're definitely not Italian," affirmed the male officer, unable to suppress a smile that was creeping across his face. The revelation made me feel a tad disappointed, I have to say. It might have made me feel more exotic to have Italian ancestry. "Your father's side of the family, I believe, is from Fairbanks, Alaska. Your mother's side of the family is from California. Your grandmother lives in this seaside town. It was your grandmother who reported you missing and contacted the police."
"Why not my parents? Why didn't they do that?" I asked incredulously. "Where are they?"
"You don't live with your parents. You live with your grandmother. A lovely woman she is, too. We both met her. She'd been away for the weekend to Fairbanks in Alaska to visit her sister for her birthday. When she returned, she was very concerned as to your whereabouts. She couldn't find you anywhere and sensed that something was terribly wrong. She phoned everybody she could think of to establish where you could be. It would seem no one knew where you were. which was why she reported you missing to the police. We are satisfied that she is indeed your genuine grandmother. She is here now waiting in the restaurant downstairs having coffee. Very excited to see you, she is."
"It's true," said the female officer, interjecting. "She was so worried about you. A very nice old lady. We wanted to get your permission first before we sent her up. Do you think you can handle any visitors? I know she's dying to see you. I can stay with you if you like, if it's all too much for you. Or your grandmother can come back another day if you prefer, when you're feeling stronger perhaps. She's worried about you and startled to hear about your amnesia. She cannot get her head around the fact that you don't know who you are, but she's eager to fill in the blanks for you, resolve some of your mysteries, so to speak. The good news is we questioned her. She is certain you have absolutely no enemies. She thinks you were attacked. It was likely a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or that you could have had a nasty fall or something." "Well, that is a relief," I said.
"It goes without saying that we're still viewing what happened to you with a measure of suspicion until your memory comes back to you. We'll likely still be drawing blanks, but we shall be questioning your friends and family, as a precautionary measure, of course. Do you think you're up to seeing your grandmother? She can fill in all the blanks for you, resolve some of the mystery, as my colleague says. So speaking to her will be a relief for you. You'll be able to establish who you are."
"It is a relief, I agree. I think I am ready. I am up to seeing her. Ready as I'll ever be. So I guess you can send her up." The female officer gave me her card. "Ring me if you remember anything or need anything. Remember, I'm only a phone call away." "Thanks so much," I said. "I appreciate everything you've both done."
"It's our job," said the male detective. "I hope, Isla, that your memory does come back to you. And as my colleague was saying, if you remember anything significant, don't hesitate to get in touch. We wish you the best and a speedy recovery."
I wait rather apprehensively in my hospital bed, propped up against fluffy pillows, nervously anticipating my visitor. All I know is that my name is Isla Holmes. Believe it or not, from what the officer told me, I'm not of Italian heritage, which has thrown me off my pedestal a little. Apparently I've been living with my grandmother for the last 3 months, but the detective, or officer, was evasive when I asked after my parents. She looked at me with sorrowful eyes, as if holding something back. I wonder if my parents are actually dead. Maybe they were killed in a car accident or something, a long time ago. Why have I only been living with my grandmother, though, for the last 3 months? Maybe they died more recently. That must be it. I don't even have an apartment or a job, because I obviously still live with my grandmother. The detective mentioned college friends, so I guess I must be a student. I don't even know how old I actually am. I have so many questions. I'm hoping my grandmother can shed some light on everything for me. At least the police are treating my case with a measure of suspicion, although they're open to the fact that I accidentally might have smashed my head on a rock after a fortuitous fall and got caught up in an ocean current and swept away to sea. Or a perfect stranger who didn't know me from a bar of soap vindictively whacked me on the back of the head. But they believe that scenario is very unlikely and rarely ever happens, as most crimes are driven by motive. I may know nothing about my past. I may not know who I am or where I'm from, but what I do know is something is not adding up about me being caught up in the ocean. But without knowing who I am, I'm grasping at straws. I try to comprehend what actually happened to me. Before long, a nurse is beckoning an old woman into my hospital ward. The guard on the outside, whom had been informed by the officers that she was paying me a visit, grants her access to the ward. I'm so disappointed because I do not recognize her, as she moves steadily towards me, her blue eyes clouded with concern. She places a bottle of old-fashioned cinnamon cola on the countertop by my bed, and a paper bag containing big fat juicy green grapes, along with another paper bag containing a large ice apple fritter. She tells me that those are my favourite doughnuts. She pulls a chair beside my bed, grabbing my hand in hers. My grandmother tentatively looks at me, and for a brief second we're both bathed in a rather uneasy silence. "I've been so worried, my dear,"
How are you feeling? Do you recognize me at all?" I retract my hand away from her, because this woman is a stranger to me. She may be my grandmother by blood, but I do not know her at all. I don't recognize her. "Are you really my grandmother?" I ask her, peering at her like I might look at a dissected tadpole under a slide of a microscope in a science laboratory. The woman frowns, so that the crepey lines around her face are greatly accentuated. "So it's true, then? You really have lost your memory? Oh, how dreadful, you poor, poor thing! When the lovely police officer or detective told me that you had retrograde amnesia, I think it's called, it was hard for me to grasp, because I couldn't imagine you losing your memory like this. I've always been so very close to you, my dear. Do I not even look familiar to you at all?" she asked me with a hopeful glint in her eyes. "Sorry," I say, shaking my head vigorously, tears spilling down my cheeks, as I'm infuriated not to remember a damn thing, but there is nothing that I can do about it. "It's not your fault, my dear. Please don't blame yourself. I'm just so heartily relieved that you're alive and well, on your way to making a full recovery. After all, isn't that what really matters? But you do look so pale and washed out, my dear. You must have been so terribly frightened." I study my grandmother. She has a shock of white curly hair, framing her small pixie face. She has a flawless peachy complexion that is in excellent condition, but she's got a feathering of expressive lines around her blue eyes that announce her age very cheerily, but the lines make her rather interesting. She is petite but walks with a bit of a stoop, but I'm struck with a realization that I don't look at all like her. My grandmother reaches out to me, squeezing my hand. "Please don't be upset, my dear. From what that lovely police lady told me, you've had a nasty, nasty shock. She says in time your memory will come back. But it's the trauma that made it go away. It's keeping your memories at bay for the time being as a kind of protective mechanism. That's what she thinks, anyway." My grandmother looks at me closely. "What were you doing on the beach, my dear? The police believe you were in that icy cold water in the ocean. You took a knock to the head, I believe. They're suggesting that someone might have intended to harm you. What a dreadful thought! I can't bear to even consider it." "That's what I'm worried about," I say, sitting up. "I can't remember anything. Do I have any enemies you know about?" My grandmother looks taken aback by my comments. "Enemies? Well, I don't think you've got any enemies, my dear. I told the lovely policewoman that, you know. Not that I know of course. You're liked by so many people. But then you're not on speaking terms with your parents, which is why you're living with me. You're only 18, you know, still at college." "My parents aren't dead," I say, sitting up with a start. "So they're not killed. They weren't killed in a car accident, then?" "Absolutely not, my dear. Where on earth did you get that strange idea from?" said my grandmother, looking rather befuddled. "Your parents are still very much alive and well. They live in this coastal town, you know, not very far from me." "If that's true, then, why aren't they visiting me at the hospital? Why am I living with you? It doesn't make any sense." My grandmother's face breaks out in a series of worried lines across her forehead. "Well, I don't know how to say this, dear, but you and your parents are not on speaking terms at the moment. It grieves my heart, it does. But your mother, she can be so obstinately stubborn. I informed them both about your very unfortunate accident. But your mother—" My grandmother seems to be unable to articulate the words. She shakes her head sorrowfully and says, "Never you mind about all that, my dear. Let's focus on the here and now, shall we? After all, that's all that matters. Dr. Walensky says you can come home when you feel ready and stronger. So let's not worry about things that we can't change, but concentrate on your getting better, my dear. I'm sure in time your memory will come back. Everything will make perfect sense to you then. For the time being, we should take things slowly but surely. I should not want to overwhelm you with too much information. Nor should you have too many visitors. Dr. Walensky says that could be overwhelming for you. I have even told your friends to stay away from you for the time being. Everybody is eager to see you. They all send their love. But everyone is relieved you're on the mend. And that's all that matters, is it not?" I grab my grandmother's arm so hard, she almost winces in pain. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that," I say apologetically. "But you need to tell me. Why am I not speaking to my parents? You don't think they tried to drown me in the ocean, do you?" My imagination is rocketing through my head with insane, preposterous ideas. If my parents are not speaking to me, would they want to harm me? Are they the reason I found myself drowning in the ocean? It was always a possibility, was it not? "Sweetheart," said my grandmother, taking my hand in hers and squeezing it sharply. "Now you listen to me. Despite everything, your parents love you very, very much. You've just had a bit of a fallout with your mother, that's all. Your mother is a bit of a drama queen. Overreacts about everything, she does. Your father wanted to come to the hospital very much to see you. He was dying to see you. Very concerned about your welfare, he was. Horrified to think that you could have drowned, and that he could have lost his beloved little girl. Your mother would not allow him to visit you, which is typical of her. She rules the household with an iron rod, I'm afraid. It's her way or the highway, always has been. In the end, your father always does what your mother wants him to do. Your mother can be as hard as nails and as cold as a dead fish," she said, shaking her head sorrowfully. "My son used to stand up for himself in the good old days before he married your mother. But my goodness, how times have changed. Your mother says it's karma what happened to you, and that the good Lord is punishing you for your sins so that you will be brought to repentance. Your mother's very angry with you, my dear. She threw you out of the family household, which is why you live with me. She's not best pleased with me for taking you in. She thinks no one should help you in the circumstances." At this startling revelation from my grandmother, I contort my face into a road map of puzzle lines across my forehead. I stare at my grandmother with a bewildered look on my face. What could I have done that was so terrible that my own mother wanted to regurgitate me like a bad meal that she'd eaten at the greasy spoon? "Circumstances, I say. What circumstances?" My grandmother shifts uncomfortably in her chair. For a moment she avoids my steely, inquiring gaze. "Your mother is a very religious lady, my dear. She takes the 10 Commandments very seriously. I've always tried to point out to her that she's far too self-righteous for her own good, like the Pharisees in the Bible. But she doesn't see herself like that. It's amazing how she sees herself. I think she considers herself to be a virtuous, godly woman. Let's just say she sees the splinter in everybody else's eye all too clearly, and fails to see the huge log in her own eye. When she discovered what you'd done, she threw you out of the house without even batting an eyelash. She was so incensed with you. She even tossed your clothes out of the window, making a spectacle and a complete exhibition of the whole affair in front of the neighbours. One of the neighbours described it as watching a scene out of Days of Our Lives. Why, the only other week when I was grocery shopping in the supermarket, with you at my side, your mother was there in the supermarket doing a weekly grocery shop. I went up to her and said, "Hello, Margaret, how you doing?" And you know what she said to me.
No, I say, bemused. What did she say to you?
She looked at me as if I was a perfect stranger, and she said to me, "Do I know you? I think not." And with that she swaggered away with her trolley, turning around and said, "What does darkness have in common with light? Nothing as far as I'm concerned. You are the dark, I am the light. So sorry, I do not know you." You were most upset about that, and went running after your mother, begging her not to be so unreasonable towards you. Your mother spat on your shoes and said, "I've got nothing to say to you. As far as I'm concerned, you are not my daughter any more. I will never forgive you for what you did."
But I don't understand. What could I have done that was so dreadful, I ask? Once again my grandmother looks extremely uncomfortable. She lowers her voice to a whisper.
"You've been having an affair with a married man, my dear."
"I have," I said, looking at my grandmother with rounded eyes. "What is his name?"
"His name is Drew Sanguestern."
"Where did I meet him?" I ask.
"You were babysitting the Sanguesterns' 2 children, 8-year-old Patty and 6-year-old Arla."
"You are joking," I say aghast. "I had an affair with the kid's father. How could I do that? That's awful." My grandmother frowned.
"That's exactly what your mother said, my dear. She was very angry with you. She said marriage is sacred, that you have deliberately destroyed and defiled what God has brought together, and that she could not have someone living under her roof who dishonored the good Lord."
"Does this Mrs. Sanguestine know that I've been having an affair with her husband? Maybe she's the one that wanted me dead. Surely I've made an enemy out of her. I mean, if she knew I was cheating with her spouse, then maybe she felt threatened by me, worried about her marriage collapsing. You know what they say, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. She must feel so betrayed by her husband. And by me, of course."
"As far as I know, she never had any knowledge of the affair. But I'm afraid Mrs. Sangueston is dead. So your theory about her being behind why you found yourself drowning in the ocean carries no weight."
"She's dead?" I gasp. "That's dreadful. Those poor kids losing their mother like that. When did this happen?"
"About a week ago, my dear. She was found at home, as dead as a dodo. The coroner said she died of a fatal stroke."
"That's dreadful," I say again. "Do they know what caused it?"
"Your mother is blaming you, my dear, for what happened to Mrs. Sanguestin, which is most unfortunate because it is not your fault. She phoned you to tell you in no uncertain terms that she never wanted to speak to you ever again, and that even if Mrs. Sanguestin did not know about your tortured affair with her husband, that indirectly you were responsible for her death. She claims that a wronged woman always knows when she's been cheated on, and that this revelation, even if it was unconscious, was eating Mrs. Sanguistine up on the inside, facilitating her death. I must be such a bad person, I say. The way I feel about myself now, I don't believe I'd willingly set out to hurt anyone like this. As for hurting those poor children by cheating with their mother's husband, I just don't know what to say. I'm confounded. I can't believe I behaved so inappropriately. Those poor kids. My grandmother nudged me gently on the shoulders, wiping one of my stray tears away with a tissue that she dragged out of her purse, that smelt of talcum powder and lavender. Now you listen to me, my young lady. You're an 18-year-old girl, for goodness sake. That man, Mr. Sanguistine, seduced you. It was not the other way round. He's the one who should be ashamed of his behaviour. He is old enough to be your father. He is? I asked, looking staggered. You're joking, right? Why would I go out with someone as old as my dad? Well, he knew what he was doing, my grandmother said, sounding angry. He pursued you with flowers and chocolates and romantic poetry. I do not like the man, especially when he claimed he'd written a poem that was written by a famous poet. He's as slippery as an eel, and I told you as much while you were dating him. I knew you were feeling chuffed because an old man was showing so much interest in you, but that in time I hoped you would see the error of your ways. You know the saying, if they'll do it with you, they'll likely do it to you. You were so in love with the man, so flattered by all his advances. You are young and naive, my dear. I think it was exciting for you to have an older gentleman showing so much interest in you. It made you feel all grown up. You said he was so much more mature than the other boys that showed you interest and gave you compliments. Your mother begged you to end the affair, but you insisted you were very much in love with Mr. Sanguistine, and that would never happen. You kept going on about how he was going to divorce his wife. You would adopt his children. Your mother was incensed with you. She called you some foul names that I don't care to repeat. My grandmother seemed to shudder at the mere memory of the names my mother had used on me. She shook her head sorrowfully. Your mother can be so unreasonable, as I keep saying. She failed to appreciate how manipulative your boyfriend is. She thinks you were making a play for the man, but it was the other way round. I told him to leave you alone. He called me a silly old bat who should mind my own business. The way my grandmother is talking about me, it's almost as if she's talking about somebody else that I don't know and wouldn't want to know either. Someone who didn't care in upsetting the apple cart of somebody else's marriage. I almost feel empathy for my mother being angry with me, having an affair with a married man. But despite her strong religious convictions, I think she was wrong to throw me out of her home. She sounds as if she's rather judgmental. And as for my father, why does he not stand up to her and fight my corner for me? I'm his daughter, am I not? When I'm looking at events objectively, it seems ridiculous. Why would I ever get embroiled with a married man? What about his children? I had been babysitting them. Didn't I care about them? Why was I so willing to be seduced by the father of these children? Looking at things objectively, it seems ridiculous. Why on earth would I get embroiled with a married man? And what about his poor children that I'd been babysitting? Did I not care about their welfare? Why was I so willing to be seduced by the father of these kids? Looking at things from the outside in, as if gazing through a window pane, like Scrooge did in the Christmas Carol, when he was taken by the ghost of Christmas past, to see what his actions were like on the others involved in his life, and it wasn't pretty. I didn't need the ghost of Christmas past to get a rather unpleasant view over the life I had just lived. I didn't like what I was seeing. As if my grandmother was reading my very thoughts, she said to me, "It's not your fault, my dear. You don't know what that man was like. You should have seen the romantic poetry he kept writing for you. It was over the top, and as I said, half of the flowery writing was not even his own, but he still chose to take credit for it, which affirms to me his natural dishonesty. You were grievously upset because he kept telling you he was going to leave that wife of his, and that he'd tell her about you, but he never ever did. I told you myself that he was never going to leave his wife. As I told you, I saw the family one time together at a bowling green. He pretended not to see me, you know. I saw him with his wife, and he looked very happy. So I'm telling you, that woman had absolutely no idea he was cheating on her. I saw her in the ladies' room at the bowling green, and I told her what a lovely family she had. She proceeded to tell me how wonderful her husband Drew was. She was oblivious to the affair. So none of this is your fault, my dear." I look at my grandmother through bleary, bewildered eyes. I can't believe I caused so much upset to everybody. I have no memory of those events, but I hope to do things differently from now on, I said. I certainly don't want to be involved with a married man, especially when I can't remember. It ends now. Please tell the nurses that if Drew Sanguistine comes to the hospital to visit me, I do not want to see him. My grandmother looks very pleased by my words. "Well, isn't that a turn-up for the books? I'm so glad to see that you're seeing things differently now. When I told him you were washed up the beach because he phoned me, you know, and that you were suffering from retrograde amnesia, he was very concerned about you, told me he wanted to visit you. I said he wasn't welcome to do that at all. So he wasn't pleased with me, let me tell you." All of a sudden, a nurse came into the room with a warm smile on her face. "Hello, Isla. You have a visitor," she says, beckoning a familiar-looking man into the ward, who the guard on duty allows to enter. My hopes lift because I appeared to be remembering someone, until the nurse introduces the man to me. "This is Mr. Weston Taylor. He was the one, Isla, who found you on the beach. He just wanted to drop by to see how you're doing." Mr. Taylor is standing at my hospital bed. I notice his silvery hair and his familiar profile. He's carrying a huge bouquet of flowers in his hands. It is a generous thing to do to bring me flowers like this, when he doesn't even know me. His charm touches me to the quick. When he sees me with my grandmother, he retracts a little, apologetically, saying, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know you already had a visitor. I'll come back another time, shall I?" "Absolutely not," says my grandmother, extending her hand to Weston. "My name is May Holmes. This is my granddaughter Isla, whom you are the one that kindly rescued on the beach. I can't tell you how grateful I am to you, Mr. Taylor. There are no words of gratitude for what you did. If it were not for you, I dread to think what would have become of my granddaughter," she said, shuddering. "She might not be with us now. What a dreadful thought that is. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Taylor, you are a hero." "It's very kind of you to say, Mrs. Holmes, but it was nothing. I only did what anyone else would have done in the circumstances. I'm glad I was woken up by the annoying seagulls that morning, and decided to go for a walk extra early on the beach with my dog Trout." "Don't be so humble, Mr. Taylor. In my book you're a hero, and nothing will persuade me to think otherwise. The name is May. I must insist you call me May. said my grandmother assertively, taking the large bouquet of flowers from Weston and calling a nurse over to put them in a vase. "It's so very kind of you, Mr. Taylor, to buy my granddaughter such a ravishing bouquet of flowers. You really are a perfect gentleman." My grandmother beckons for Weston to sit down. She pulls a chair for him up to the bedside. He looks bemused, his eyes skimming over both me and my grandmother. "I remember you. You're called Weston. Your dog's called Trout. It's about the only thing I do remember," I say. "I recall your dog, Trout, licking me all over my face. Believe it or not, it was a pleasant experience. It made me feel as if I was still alive." "Trout is a very good dog," agreed Weston, "but he can be inclined to be a little naughty. But my life is all the richer with him being in it." "My granddaughter's suffering from retrograde amnesia," my grandmother explained to Weston. "She doesn't remember who she is. She has no memory of me, but she remembers you. How did you come to find her, Mr. Taylor? I'm dying to hear your story." "It's Weston," said Mr. Taylor. "No need to be formal or to call me by my surname. Everybody calls me Weston. It's a long, rather idiosyncratic story, shall we say. But the main thing is I found your granddaughter on the beach when I was taking Trout for his stroll. For a moment I thought your daughter was a mannequin from a shop window, you know the kind. And when you flinched, my dear, I almost had a heart attack on the beach. I got the shock of my life, I did. I genuinely thought you were a doe. Your skin was so waxy." "I'm so sorry," I say. "I didn't mean to scare the bejesus out of you. It's so kind of you to bring me all those flowers, as my grandmother was saying." Weston smiled brightly.
"It's only a pleasure. I'm glad you're all right. As I was saying, you gave me quite the scare, you did. For a moment I thought Isla was a mannequin from a shop window. You know the sort. I was rather befuddled as to why it had been washed up on the beach. I almost had a heart attack when Isla flinched. I got the shock of my life, I did. I genuinely thought you were a doe. Your skin was so waxy."
"I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to scare the bejesus out of you. It's so kind of you to bring me all those flowers, by the way, as my grandmother was saying. Very generous." Weston smiled brightly.
"It's only a pleasure. I'm glad you're all right. That's the main thing. But you did give me a dreadful scare, you did. For a moment I did not think you were going to make it. You were blue from the cold, but your clothes were surprisingly dry. Do you have any recollection of what happened? Why you ended up on the beach in the first place?"
"I wish I did," I say. "I have a memory of being in the water drowning, and a big black hairy creature with yellow eyes rescuing me, bringing me to the shore and warming me up. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I think the creature's warm body managed to dry up my clothes." At my preposterous words, my grandmother appears to grow red with embarrassment.
"I'm sure, Weston, that Isla here not only has retrograde amnesia, but perhaps she's suffering from a few delusions. You know how cold water can affect you," she says apologetically. "It can play all kinds of tricks on the mind. Do you know people with advanced hypothermia sometimes believe they're hot? They begin to throw off their clothes in freezing conditions." "I've heard that before," Weston admitted, "but I'm quite sure your granddaughter is not delusional. In fact, her story makes perfect sense to me."
Before my grandmother can say anything else, a nurse charges towards us tentatively. "I'm so sorry. Visiting hours are up. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Dr. Walensky is insisting that Isla here gets as much sleep as possible. It's not good for her to have too much stimulation when she's recovering her memory. It's a step-by-step process."
"That's understandable. We'll go then,"
My grandmother slips her arm through Weston's, as if they're an old married couple. I don't know who's more surprised, me or Weston.
Weston, let's go downstairs, shall we, to have some coffee together? I want you to tell me all about you. Are you married?
I can hear Weston telling my grandmother, no, he's not, and that his wife died a short while ago. And then their voices become fainter and fainter and more muted as they finally leave the ward. I am left to digest everything that I've been told. I tell the nurse that under no circumstances do I want to receive any visits from a man called Drew Sanguiston. I return to sleep, wondering what could have induced me ever to get involved with a married man, who had children, and the man was old enough to be my father. Had I really lost leave of my senses? It would seem so. Did I have an Oedipus complex or something? I have no memory of the relationship and no desire to pursue it any further, even though the man's wife is now dead. I feel a tad annoyed with my mother, even though I have no memory of her, but by the sounds of things, she's way too judgmental, condescending and self-righteous. I resent her for being so bigoted in her opinions. I was her daughter, for goodness sake. Why was she so quick to condemn me? I was 18 years old, and teenagers like myself were notorious for making monumental mistakes in their lives, experimenting with drugs, smoking or drinking way too much, and going out of a limb to make some precarious life choices along the way. But that was the quintessential privilege of being a teenager, learning to navigate your way through the stormy twists and turns of life. Everyone seemed to know that, with the exception of my mother. Wasn't it my mother's job to be an anchor for me in my life, a lighthouse that guided me safely to shore when I became adrift and went astray? I wondered privately whether my mother, with her devout Christian beliefs, would go so far as to wantonly harm me. Surely not. I was certain someone had tried to harm me. I'd ended up drowning in the ocean. I had sustained a large bump on the back of my head. Even if the police assumed it was an accident, I didn't believe it to be so. The only two people that were furious with me were likely Drew Sanguistin's wife if she'd found out about my affair with her husband, but she couldn't have been responsible for what had happened to me, given she was now deceased. But my mother was very much alive. She was also angry with me for having the affair with Drew Sanguistin in the first place. I had no way of knowing what my mother was capable of. Would she consider it serving God by taking me down to a watery grave? It was always a possibility. Let's not kid. So many things were done in the name of religion, in order to honour God. But there was nothing honourable about killing someone to right a wrong. Yet some people considered it noble to kill for God. What had my mother said to my grandmother in the grocery store? What does the dark have in common with the light? Do I know you? It would seem my mother thought my grandmother was a heathen for taking me under her charge. But in the grand scheme of things, my grandmother was the one who'd shown me compassion and unconditional love, even if she privately disapproved of some of my less than desirable life choices. It was going to be tough to pick up the pieces of my life again, to make sense of everything, but trying to be a sleuth like Nancy Drew was not helping me in any way make sense of what had happened to me. It would seem a couple of days later that Dr. Valensky assured me confidently that I was well enough to go home, and was to learn that my grandmother and Weston were spending a lot of time together.
"He's a lovely man," my grandmother told me. "Such a hero for rescuing you on the beach. He does remind me of your late grandfather, you know. And by the way, I failed to mention, he believes your story about being rescued by a big black thing with yellow eyes. He said he believed a male Bigfoot saved your life. He told me an extraordinary story about how he encountered a male Bigfoot on the beach that morning, when he found you tangled up in seaweed. Weston does not believe he would have noticed the lump of rags on the beach had it not been for the Bigfoot who pointed you out. Isn't that an incredible story?"
It was indeed an incredible story, and I was now absolutely certain that it was a Bigfoot that had saved me from drowning in the perilous icy cold waters of the ocean. The creature had held me to his powerful chest and kept me lovely and warm. He fit the profile of what I'd encountered amidst my foggy recollections, clouded by a vague obscurity. But I do remember those kind yellow eyes, the reassuring voice in my head that affirmed to me that all would be well, and that he'd sent help for me in the screams of the seagulls. Had not Weston said that the seagulls had woken him up, so that he had ventured out onto the beach extra early? Had the Bigfoot encouraged the gulls to scream out loud that morning, to wake up an unsuspecting sleeper like Weston? It was a distinct possibility. "You like Weston, don't you?" I asked my grandmother teasingly.
"That's an understatement, my dear," my grandmother said. "The moment he walked into the hospital ward, my heart began to pound like it did when I was a teenager, when I first met your grandfather. Weston's wife died recently, you know. He loved her so much, talks about her all the time so fondly, how much he misses her. I think he's enjoying my company, and I enjoy being his friend, you know. He doesn't know many people in these parts. He's originally from Houston in Texas, you see. He moved here to be close to the ocean. He lives in a modern house that's very state-of-the-art on the beach, which is not his thing, really. But the place has excellent ocean views. It would be nice if our friendship turned a tad romantic, because we both need companionship at our age. I think he's warming to me, you know. I've just got to show him that I'm worth having around, like his lovable dog Trout.
I'm sure he'll see sense soon, I say with a twinkle in my eyes, hoping with all my heart things will work out between my grandmother and Weston. From what she told me, my grandfather had been dead for over 15 years. He died very suddenly from reasons unknown.
"It happens," my grandmother had told me. "It's called sudden death syndrome for adults. The coroner had no explanation as to why he died. As my husband was a very healthy man, you know. No health problems. He kept himself very fit and always watched his diet."
That was weird, him dying like that, I said. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. When I moved into my grandmother's house, nothing looked remotely familiar to me. Dr. Walensky had warned me that this would probably be the case, but it was very unsettling, not recognizing a single thing. It would seem that my retrograde amnesia had decided to vindictively set up shop in my mind, consuming everything, taking over everything, so I had no memory of anything at all, and that included my grandmother's white Maltese poodle Mopsy, and her beautiful fluffy white Persian cat with blue eyes called Henry VIII, who rubbed his long sleek coat against me as if he knew me very well. My bedroom in my grandmother's house boasted a faded poster of Justin Timberlake on the wall. My clothes and my things gave me no indication about who I was, and my life before my amnesia. My grandmother tried desperately to fill in the blanks for me, showing me photograph albums so that strangers and pictures began to become like a story in my head that was beginning to make some kind of sense. My amnesia was driving me completely potty, but my grandmother's warm heart made me feel as if I was warmly loved and belonged in my strange enigmatic existence, which was like a topsy-turvy jigsaw puzzle that I was trying to piece together bit by bit. My grandmother had thought it better I did not return to college or to my friends until my memory returned, and I was so glad about that. Even Dr. Walensky had saliently advised for me to take things extra slowly in the beginning, or everything would become far too overwhelming for me. He was right, for every day presented for me brand new challenges that I had to overcome. I felt like a horse galloping around an obstacle course, wondering when I was going to knock over some of the obstacles in my path, rather than glide over them seamlessly. Worse still, I was always looking over my shoulders, wondering if someone was out there, watching and waiting, someone who clandestinely wished to harm me for some reason.
If they found out I was alive and well, would they come after me again? Would they try and hurt me? Would they try and kill me? My grandmother had not been there over that weekend. She had left me at her house in town and taken a flight to Fairbanks in Alaska to stay with her sister Beryl for the weekend.
I needed to see my sister, she explained. Beryl was celebrating her 80th birthday in Fairbanks, so how could I not go to that party? You agreed to stay behind to look after the animals. You know, Beryl looked marvellous for her age. Sharp as a hawk she is. We had a fabulous time. But when I returned to the house, you were gone, which was most unlike you. Thankfully, Mopsy and Henry VIII were absolutely fine. I had a profound sense that something was very wrong, so I went to report your absence to the police after phoning anyone I could think of, including your boyfriend, Drew Sanguistine, to ask them if they knew of your whereabouts. But everybody claimed they had seen no sight or sound of you. I had no doubt, my dear, that you would get up to all kinds of mischief while I was away. But I was fine with that. I'd have probably done much the same myself at your age. What do they say? While the cat's away, the mouse doth play. I did advise you not to go and see Drew Sanguistine, not after he'd recently lost his wife. I persuaded you that you needed to give your boyfriend time to grieve over his wife, but you claimed he wouldn't be upset that she was dead. But I told you it was very important to give him space, especially for the sake of those children that have lost their mother. To respect that. I'd like to think you listened to my advice, but I can't be sure if you did or didn't.
I said that to you, I gasped. Was I really that heartless? I mean, those poor children. They lost their mother, and I'm selfishly thinking what I stand to gain, now that my boyfriend's wife is out of the way. You're painting me out to be an absolute monster, Granny. My grandmother shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly.
You've always had a good heart, Isla, but you had blinders on your eyes as far as Drew Sanguistine was concerned. You'd have walked to the edge of the earth for that man. Even though—
My grandmother stops in mid-sentence, as if wondering whether it was wise to pursue the conversation. Even though what? I ask, coaxing her to continue. My grandmother begins to play with her pearls around her neck, in a self-soothing gesture, as clearly she's not comfortable talking about Drew Sanguistine. It's blindingly clear to me she didn't like him at all.
Do you really want me to continue? She asked gingerly. I'm not sure, my dear, that I should.
Please go on, Granny. I insist.
Well, I don't always feel— Well, actually, I do. I don't know how to put it, my dear, but I got the sense that Drew Sanguistine was always playing with you, like a cat toying with a mouse, if you know what I mean. That his intentions were never honourable or pure. He kept assuring you he'd tell his wife about your relationship. But it speaks volumes, don't you think, that he never ever did? I knew he was never going to leave his wife. He liked to have his cake and eat it. And I genuinely believe he loved his wife. And if he had to choose between her and you, I hate to say this, my love, but he would have chosen her, I'm most sure. You, Isla, with your endearing, sweet, whimsical naivety, believed everything he told you. You always made so many excuses for the man as to why he hadn't told his wife about the affair. I think when his wife died of that massive stroke, tragic it really was it not? You thought that you and Drew were meant to be together. You were excited about the future that you saw as incredibly rosy. But I'm sure that that man would never have committed to you, not even after his wife's death.
I really don't think he would have." As my grandmother was talking about me, it felt like she was describing a fictitious character in a novel that many readers would literally love to hate, my being one of them. The babysitter who has an affair with the husband and willfully chooses to destroy a marriage and upset 2 children. I would not be the kind of character many would warm to. The more my grandmother talked about my stinking presumptuous attitude and obvious fixation on Drew Sanguiston, the more I despised the person who was supposed to be me.
"I never liked your boyfriend," my grandmother continued. "He knew I loathed him. I told him he was playing games with you, Isla, stringing you along, and that he had no intention of leaving his wife for you. That's what you want her to believe, isn't it?" I told him. "You want her to believe that you're going to marry her." "It's none of your business," he said to me. "Isla is old enough and ugly enough to make her own choices. I don't need an old bat like you interfering in our lives." I told him it was my business because I was your grandmother. "She's a big girl, you old bat. If she scrapes her knee, she doesn't need you to nurse it better for her. Leave us alone. Keep your big fat grubby nose out of our personal business, will you?" "Well, I think it's about time that your wife knows exactly what's going on with my granddaughter, Drew. I think she should be informed about this, don't you?" "You think you should tell her, do you, old bat? Leave my wife out of this, do you understand? She doesn't need to know about any of this. And if you dare say a thing, I will kill you. You understand? I will kill you." "He said that to you?" I asked in astonishment. "He did more. He threatened me by slicing his finger across his throat, as if to say, 'You're a dead woman if you dare say anything to my wife.'" I decided, as my grandmother confided in me about Drew, that he must be an arrogantly cocky individual who had feelings of grandiosity and only cared about himself. It affirmed to me that I didn't want to see him again, even though I had absolutely no memory of him. I was privately relieved the nurses had sent Drew Sanguistine away when he visited me at the hospital with a large bouquet of flowers. They told him I had no memory of him, and in the circumstances I did not wish to see him. He had thrown a fit in the hospital, and the flowers he'd brought across the floor in the reception area and stormed out. The nurse I spoke to described him as not a very nice man, and belligerently capricious. My parents did come to visit me one day at my grandmother's house, when my grandmother persuaded them to pay me a visit. My mother was incredibly reluctant to see me, but my grandmother told her that I had changed after my fortuitous unfortunate accident out at sea, and had completely lost my memory. Furthermore, she had assured her that I was repentant about having an affair with a married man, and that I did not wish to see him at all. He had had a hissy fit, throwing the flowers he'd brought me across the floor of the hospital reception, and storming out. The nurse I spoke to described him as a capriciously belligerent, not very nice man. My parents did come to visit me one day when I was living at my grandmother's house. My grandmother persuaded them to pay me a visit. My mother was very reluctant about coming, but my grandmother told her I'd changed after my fortuitous unfortunate accident, and had completely lost my memory. Furthermore, she assured her that I was extremely repentant about having an affair with a married man, and that I'd seen the error of my ways. My mother arrived with my father at my grandmother's house, and once again I was staring at 2 strangers I did not know. It was incredibly uncomfortable, and I felt very self-conscious. I was hoping I'd have some memory of them, but my mind was a blank canvas yet to be painted. I liked my father immediately. He had a warm, loving personality. My grandmother's kind blue eyes were in his face, and he immediately swept me in my arms lovingly. He was so thrilled to see me, and there were tears in his eyes.
I knew at once he loved me.
"Oh, it's good to see you, love. How are you feeling, Isla?" he said. "I've been worried sick about you, I have. What is this about you nearly drowning in the ocean, sustaining a nasty bump on your head? You poor, poor thing."
My father immediately let go of his hold of me when he realized that I was becoming rigidly uncomfortable and stiff in his all-embracing, effusive hug.
"I apologize. You don't remember me, do you, Isla? I'm being far too familiar. It's just so good to see you, love. I can hardly contain my emotions, but I understand that you don't remember me. How are you feeling? Are the police any closer to knowing exactly what happened to you?" "I'm afraid no one knows what happened to poor Isla here. It's an absolute mystery. I think even the police are confounded. But they've reached the conclusion that it was probably an accident. Maybe Isla slipped over some rocks, fell into the ocean for a while, knocked her head. But she couldn't have been in the water for very long. Otherwise she would almost certainly have died." "But what if it wasn't an accident?" said my father. "The police need to take this seriously. What if someone was purposely trying to hurt our daughter? If anyone hurts Isla, I'll kill them myself. We need to get to the bottom of this. We need to find out what's going on here."
"There's no need to get upset and to overreact," said my grandmother. "Maybe the answers will be forthcoming when Isla's memory is restored. The doctor thinks it'll soon be back."
"The sooner the better," says my father, looking at me sympathetically. "You poor thing, Isla. I can only imagine how daunting it must be, not to even remember who you are."
"It's not easy, I admit. It's a struggle for me every day, trying to make sense of everything." My mother is staring at me through critical dark brown eyes, which she's rolling in the back of her head in exasperation.
"Oh, Eric, for goodness sake, would you shut up? Get a grip. Stop fussing over Isla like this. You're making a spectacle of yourself."
My grandmother gestured for my mother to sit down on a comfortable wing chair, covered in pretty floral design in her living room, while she rattled around with her Royal Dalton cups and saucers on the coffee table. She looked a tad nervous, and was eyeing my mother suspiciously through narrowing eyes, as if considering dealing with my mother was like navigating her way very gingerly around a volatile hand grenade that had the potential to go off quite explosively.
"It's good to see you, Margaret," she said to my mother coyly. "How have you been, my dear?"
I noticed that my grandmother did not hug my mother, nor did she give her a couple of affectionate kisses on the cheek, like you would normally do when you welcome someone into your home, which suggested to me that there was no love lost between the two of them. My grandmother busied herself with a tea tray as a convenient, useful distraction, while my mother raised a cynical brow as she studied my grandmother through a calculating gaze.
"It's kind of you to ask, Tilly. I felt better, I will confess. In truth, I don't appreciate you dragging me around here to see my daughter. What on earth would I want to see Isla for, after the dreadful things she's put me through, as well as her father? I'm Christian, Tilly, and my daughter has brought shame upon our family. Have you got any idea what it feels like?"
My grandmother ignored my mother's thorny words and said very quietly,
"I'm very glad you came, Margaret. Very glad indeed. Grateful to you I am. It's important for Isla to see you in the circumstances. She has no memory of the both of you, so it was very significant for her to meet you, so she can put the pieces of her life together and make sense of things, you know. Now let me pour you some tea. I know you take yours without sugar, Margaret," said my grandmother.
She began busily pouring my parents' tea with trembling fingers and offering around plates of sandwiches and chocolate brownies, but my parents ignored her. They both had their beady eyes pinned on me, like the people on an audience at a theatre, waiting for the curtains to be drawn for the play to start. My mother's eyes were judgmental, my father's were kind and benevolent, misted over with tears, as if he was so touched to see me again. Ostensibly the atmosphere in the living room was so tense you could have cut it with a knife, as my mother looked like a formidable ice queen. When she'd entered the room it certainly felt like the temperature in the room had become significantly colder. My mother looked at me with disgust, like you might look towards a dead frog that you were about to dissect in a biology experiment. My mother's dark brown hair was worn neatly in an old-fashioned 60s beehive style above her head. Her face was long, her lips narrow, her cheeks rather sunken. She was a thin woman, wearing a well-fitting tweed jacket and matching pencil skirt, with a sensible pair of no-nonsense brogues on her feet. My mother's formidable, calculating face was devoid of makeup, apart from a very soft peach lipstick on her lips. She stared at me insouciantly through her dark hooded eyes, with a large frown that developed on her face.
"So look what the ocean dragged in with the seaweed," she said coldly. "You're very lucky, Isla, that the good Lord regurgitated you on the beach like that. Spared your life, he did. He showed mercy to you, that you did not deserve, my girl. But we have a merciful God, willing to give second chances. I, on the other hand, am not so accommodating," she said scathingly. "Did I not warn you, Isla, that getting involved with a married man would stir up the Lord's wrath? Look what's happened to you. You very nearly died, and now you don't even remember who you are. It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic."
"I'm so sorry," I say to my mother obsequiously, "about everything that happened, all the upset I caused you. You have every right to be aggrieved with me."
"I would prefer it if you didn't call me Mum," said my mother. "There's no intimacy between the two of us. My name is Mrs. Holmes. I prefer to be addressed like that."
"I have no memory of my affair, Mrs. Holmes," I say to my mother, "but I'm really sorry for the record about what happened. You're right, I should never have got involved with a married man. It was wrong of me. I'm sorry about it. I genuinely am." I genuinely wanted my mother to forgive me, and for us at least to try and get along. It seemed nonsensical that a daughter and mother were at loggerheads with each other, and in some way I wanted to make amends. It's difficult to feel any animosity towards someone when you have no memory. My mother seemed taken aback by my confession.
Well, 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 isn't that a turn-up for the books?" she says, wringing her hands together. "A repentant heart indeed. I never expected that from you, Isla. You've never been repentant before. What was it you said to me? 'I don't care what you think, Mum, I love him.'" "I told you, Margaret. Isla here is very sorry for what happened. She regrets some of the choices she made," said my grandmother. "She may be sorry now," said my mother cynically, "but it's easy to be sorry if you have no memory. But when Isla's memory returns, she will return to that dreadful, dreadful man, like a dog returns to its vomit. I blame you, Isla, for what happened to Mrs. Sanguistine. It's because of you she is dead."
"I hope you're proud of yourself, young lady, for what you've done. You should be ashamed of yourself. You cut that poor woman's life short. Even though she didn't know about the affair, she lightly sensed it. Women always do. They have a sixth sense, you know. If my husband had an affair, I'd know at once, wouldn't I, dear?" she said to her husband. Isla's father made a strange, uncomfortable noise at the back of his throat. His face flushed as red as a field of poppies. "Sweetheart, I think that is uncalled for," he said. "You heard Isla here. She's very sorry about what happened. Can we not move beyond this, please? Stop throwing stones at each other." "That's what you would like, isn't it, Eric? But our daughter here has brought shame on our family, and you're willing to just let it go like that at a snap of an elastic band?" It doesn't work like that. The damage has been done. You have no idea how embarrassed I am, because I had to tell Father Peters about the fact that our daughter here was having an affair with a married man. It looks so bad on me, like I never raised our daughter right, to respect her God-given boundaries. The proof will be in the pudding when Isla gets her memory back. You mark my words, she'll return to that man like a pig returns to its muck. And as for you, May Holmes, I hope you're proud of yourself, said Isla's mother, turning to her grandmother with an accusatory expression on her face. You're not setting a fine example for your granddaughter, are you? I may be judging my daughter's character, but you are not any better, are you? You're a fine example on my daughter, you are. I know exactly what's been going on. What is all this about, Margaret? Asked my father. Why are you running my mother down like this? Your mother is currently involved with a man who's only recently become widowed. The man's wife died not very long ago. Your mother is fraternizing with him shamelessly. Throwing herself at him, she is. It's disgusting, immoral, completely insensitive. People have seen them together in town, walking hand in hand down the beach, eating food together at a fancy restaurant. What kind of an example are you setting for our daughter, May? Nothing untoward is going on, Margaret, said my grandmother. Weston is a gentleman, he really is. He's the one that found Isla on the beach. He called the emergency services. I met him at the hospital, you know. We enjoyed dinner together. I like him very much, and yes, I did hold his hand on the beach. But nothing has happened between us. We're very good friends, that's all. He misses his wife dreadfully, and I appreciate that, you know. He needs plenty of time to grieve. But like me, he's lonely. He needs friends. He's from Houston in Texas. Doesn't know many people around here. I think he appreciates our friendship. I've introduced him to some very nice people around here. My mother rolls her judgmental dark eyes in the back of her head, her face contorting in disgust. So you make a habit, do you, May, of holding your friend's hands? This man is recently bereaved. He needs time to grieve, but you pounce on him like a hungry tiger. You're a disgrace, said my mother, giving my grandmother a glare. Do you have any idea how bad this looks? People are talking about you. They're not saying very nice things, you know. Is this necessary, Margaret? Says my father. For the record, I think you're being completely unreasonable. My mother has been on her own for 15 long years. I think she's entitled to some happiness, don't you? If she's met someone, I'm happy for her. Eric, listen to yourself. You always defend the sinner to justify immoral behaviour. You're like the sheep following the rest of the herd over the cliff. I'm sorry, but the way I see it, it's morally repugnant for your mother to be going out with a recently bereaved man. I understand where you're coming from, Margaret, and how important your religious beliefs are to you, said my grandmother. But don't take the moral high ground with me, dear. Weston is a lonely man, and he's lonely without his wife around, and without knowing many people in these parts. He appreciates my friendship with him. He even told me as much. But he doesn't want to get involved with anyone just yet. And he made that very clear to me, and I do understand it. But you still decided to throw yourself at him. For good measure, did you? My grandmother groaned. Oh, Margaret, listen to yourself, my dear. I know you're a very religious woman. And
And I do appreciate where you're coming from, as I say. But I hate the way you always believe the very worst in people, never giving them the benefit of the doubt. And that is most unkind of you. You view the world from a very distorted lens, you do. I am very happy to have made a good friend in Weston Taylor. If you were wearing my shoes and were my age, and my son wasn't around for you, I'm sure you would be very grateful for a good friendship.
Oh, please, May. I'm nothing like you, and I never will be. Do I look as if I was born yesterday? I don't know why I bothered to come here today. I have a repentant daughter, do I, May? Repentance is when someone remembers what they actually did and regrets it. How can Isla here repent of something when she has no memory of what she's repenting of? It's easy to be sorry for doing something that you have no recollection of actually doing.
Right, I've had enough, Margaret, said my grandmother, stiffening. I would appreciate it if you would leave right now. You have outstayed your welcome. You throw all kinds of false accusations at me, and furthermore you condemn your own daughter in the way that you do. You're the one that's disgusting, not me. You call yourself a Christian, but where is your compassionate heart? Where is your spirit of forgiveness? There isn't any, is there? You're a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's what you are. Now, will you get out of here now?
I'm very happy to go, but I will remind you, you were the one, May, that invited me here against my will. But I still came. You're throwing me out because you don't like to face the truth.
Out, said my grandmother, ushering my mother towards the door. Out, and don't you dare come back. She assured my father that he was the one that was welcome to stay.
I'm more than happy to go, said my mother. And if you want to repent, Isla, for what you've actually done, it might be a start if you remember your sin first.
And with that she pushed my father ahead of her, as if he was a dog on a leash. I watched them both leaving my grandmother's house, with a tortured regret. My mother was an impossible woman, whose paradigm of the world was caught up in a bubble that could not be punctured. She was mulishly stubborn, set in her ways, and had a dogged attitude of grandiosity and vaingloriousness that made me feel that she had looked down upon me and my grandmother as if we were lower forms of pond life that needed to apologize for daring to exist because we contaminated the pond water. My father looked like a beaten-down dog that had received a flogging, and my mother looked so self-important. She shook her head in exasperation as she looked towards my grandmother's house and climbed into her very immodest silver BMW. She drove away at the speed of a rocket, leaving me and my grandmother feeling dishevelled, like two chickens in a coop whom had enjoyed an unfortunate rendezvous with a fox and felt rather battered from the experience. My grandmother shuddered. Then she composed herself and straightened her back in the chair.
Well, that went well, didn't it? Not only were you attacked, my dear, but so was I. That was a turn-up for the books. The woman is so incredibly self-righteous, is she not? I'm so sorry, dear, that you had to witness all that. I should never have invited your mother around. It really was a catastrophic mistake for me to make.
It wasn't a mistake, I assured my grandmother. It was important for me to meet my parents. I may not remember them, but at least I got a sense of what my mother's like. And as you say, she's an objectionable woman. And as for my poor father, he's so downtrodden by her. I do still agree with my mother that I shouldn't have got involved with a married man. But she was wrong about you and Weston. I'm glad the two of you have a great friendship together. And don't let anything my mother says discourage you.
Don't you worry, dear. That woman has absolutely no influence over my life whatsoever.
1 month later, I stare out of the seamless floor-to-ceiling windows of Weston's contemporary home overlooking spectacular prepossessing views of the aquamarine ocean and the long golden stretch of beach sand. I'm glad to be here, even though this is the very beach where I was found, washed up on the shore, tangled among the seaweed, looking like a waxy mannequin. It's a sobering thought. I have this entire place all to myself. I agreed to stay in Weston's steel and glass state-of-the-art home for the entire week, in order to look after Trout and give him his regular morning and evening walks. Mopsy and Henry VIII are also in the house with me. Surprisingly enough, Trout is getting on famously with my grandmother's white Maltese poodle. I believe he thoroughly enjoys having another dog around the place, and Mopsy has always liked interacting with larger dogs, although he falsely believes he's infinitely superior to Trout in every way. But their differences have been ironed out, like the creases in a shirt, as they're currently both lying very snugly at my feet, as I sit back on Weston's comfortable sofa watching television. As for Henry VIII, let's just say Trout is viewing the Persian cat with a degree of scepticism, especially after Henry VIII lashed out at him with his sharp talons, growling warningly at him when Trout unabashedly began pushing his nose into the cat's chest to smell him more closely. I suspect Henry VIII was not remotely amused. He's not used to big dogs and their wet noses and slobbery kisses. My grandmother's relationship with Weston is growing from strength to strength. They're incredibly good friends now. My grandmother had taken Weston to Fairbanks in Alaska to stay with her sister. Weston has never been to Alaska before and always wanted to go. I had agreed to give Trout a walk every morning and every evening. Ostensibly, when I took Trout for his morning walk on the beach, I got the overwhelming sense that I was being followed, but nothing was ever there. I guess I'm still rather nervous. I cannot shake the feeling that someone was trying to harm me when I found myself drowning in the ocean, that on the surface looks so benign, so welcoming, but I have hands-on experience of knowing just how treacherous the waters can be. I have often woken up in the middle of the night, frantically wrestling with my sheets, my body breaking out into an ice-cold sweat, as I relive the harrowing nightmare of fighting for my life in the vindictive, spiteful, icy-cold water of the ocean. My memory still has not returned to me, but Dr. Valensky assures me it will take a while for it to come back. I'm still taking life very cautiously, one day at a time. I did meet up with a couple of college friends recently, who affirmed to me how madly in love I was with Drew Sanguistine, who had unabashedly swept me off my feet, showering me with an abundance of gifts and an excess of romantic poetry. The more I learn about my relationship with this man, the less I like him. I have been looking at photographs of him that my best friend Holly had taken of the both of us together. There I am, hanging onto his arms, looking into his eyes as if he's a demigod. And when I look at those photographs, I feel my stomach heave in revulsion. He never liked me taking pictures of the two of you together. He was probably afraid his wife might see them. You were getting frustrated with him, my friend Holly told me. He kept telling you he was going to tell his wife about your relationship, that he was going to divorce her, and then you were both going to get married. But he never did tell his wife about the two of you, and that upset you a great deal. Holly looked a little embarrassed when she told me all this. She had had a feeling that Drew was not committed to me in any way, and probably had no intention of leaving his wife on my behalf. "I think you were being played," she told me honestly. "I never liked him. There was something about him that gave me the creeps. I think that clop on the head you received has likely helped you to see sense. So some good came out of the bad. Your not seeing him again is the very best decision you've ever made, especially now his wife died after that massive stroke. It's the two kids I feel sorry for. I'm just surprised that man has agreed to leave you alone. That's all I'm saying. Drew was an intense person. He had an ego on him, and he couldn't handle rejection. I'm personally surprised that Drew has agreed to leave you alone. That's all I'm saying," said Holly gingerly. "Drew was an intense person, you know. I doubt his ego can handle rejection. Well, I believe he wasn't happy at the hospital when I refused to see him, I tell Holly. He threw a bouquet of flowers he'd brought me all over the foyer, stamped his feet in indignation. He was escorted off the premises by the hospital security. Sounds exactly like him, said Holly. I don't doubt he'd have taken your refusal to see him not very well, even if you do have amnesia. It had been a miserable overcast day, and for a while it had been raining. It is such a grey day that even the sky looks lugubriously sorrowful. I've heard a few shrieks from the seagulls, and seen a couple of sailboats on the horizon that are brazenly weathering this rather sad weather, and I find myself pondering how anyone could be out on the water with the weather this bad. Soon it begins to bucket down with rain, and I can hear the wind whistling and wailing, and even though this house is made of steel and glass, the windows are rattling precariously. I can see that I'm going to have to take a rain check on Trout's Walk this afternoon. There is no way I'm going to brave a walk on the beach in weather conditions like this. There is not a solitary soul in sight on the beach, but the two sailboats still remain on the ocean, clearly unfazed by the less than congenial weather conditions. It feels rather nippy today. The wet weather has made the temperatures plummet and dip considerably. I busy myself making a tasty tuna melt sandwich in Weston's state-of-the-art kitchen, which I enjoy with a glass of wine. I feed the dogs and cat, and lie down again on the fabulously comfortable settee. I switch on the gas fire that impersonates a real log fire with fake logs and coal. But this new age technology does not please me greatly. I'm sorry, but you can't beat the real thing. Weston's television is impressively large. I proceed to flick through the television stations, and eventually I settle on watching a movie. Weston's furniture is so deliciously comfortable that I soon drift off into the world of my dreams, and am rudely flung out of them with a start when I hear a loud banging at the front door. It is like being violently jerked forward in a car. Weston's living room is steeped in darkness. Thankfully, a couple of uplighters against the wall cast soft shadows around the room, so that I can see the contours of the furniture. I feel the weight of King Henry on my body. The two dogs have already dashed towards the front door, and are barking loudly, tails wagging. I push Henry VIII off my body. The cat is not impressed. I try to acclimatise to my bearings, my mind a foggy muddle. I am extremely annoyed to be so rudely awoken. I briefly glance at the clock on the mantel. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. You have got to be kidding me. Have I really been asleep for this long? It seems like only a moment ago it was 7 o'clock. Where did the evening get to? Who would be calling this early in the morning? This is crazy. Should I be worried? I wonder as my heart pounds violently in my chest, for I sense that someone being at the door this early is not a good thing. I wonder if I should ignore this knocking, but the dog's insistent barking drags me to the door. I cling nervously to a cast iron fire poker in my hand as a weapon of defence that is clearly not used for a fake fire, but is there as a real accessory. I hold it up in the air in a striking position and cautiously tiptoe towards the front door, switching on lights along the way, so that the dark shadows are cast out of their hiding places. Trout is scratching at the door eagerly, whimpering with excitement, while Mopsy is yapping in the way that Maltesers do, and increases the intensity of his barks when the rapping on the door continues. I stand yards away from the door, with the fire poker raised in my hand, calling out, "Who's there? Who's there?" "It's me, Isla. I need to speak with you," comes a male voice. "Who are you?" I call out. "I don't know you. Please will you go? Leave me alone. I don't know who you think you are, calling on me at this outrageous time of the morning." "My name is Drew Sanguiston. You and I were very close at one point. You may not remember me because you have amnesia, I'm told. But I need to see you. We need to talk. It's very important." "I don't remember you, Drew, but I know all about you from my grandmother. I know I made a big mistake getting involved with you. I really regret my decision. I should never have got involved with a married man with children who's old enough to be my father. I don't know who you think you are, disturbing me at this late time, or how you even knew I was staying at this house. But go away. I've got nothing to say to you. I've made my position with you clear. So you want to leave it like this, do you? All this bad blood between us? You've got nothing to say to me, have you? Fair enough. But we were in a relationship together. Don't you at least have the decency to hear me out? And then I will go, and never speak to you ever again. I've come to see you, because I believe you're in danger. I think I know what happened to you, and why you found yourself washed up on the beach. Someone tried to kill you. I can help you put the pieces together. I understand that you've lost your memory. I can help you find the answers you're looking for. It was Drew Sanguistine telling me that I was in danger and that someone had tried to kill me that made me open up the door to him. This was a question that haunted me day and night. I unequivocally knew that my struggle in the ocean in that dark water was no accident at all. So if this man, whoever he was, had answers for me, I wanted to hear them, even though I didn't want to see him at all. But I reluctantly unlatched the door and let him in, along with full cold gasps of cold air. I put down the fire poker and was grateful I was fully dressed and was wearing my sweatpants. The dogs were bouncing all around Drew excitedly, but then they distanced themselves from him, as if they suddenly had taken a dislike to him. Thank you very much for agreeing to see me, Isla. It's good to see you. Do you really have no memory of me? I'm sorry, I don't, I said. Do I not even look remotely familiar to you? He asked me, following me into the house, where I led him into the living room and beckoned for him to take a seat, which he does, but he sits at the edge of the seat as if not entirely comfortable, and adamantly declines my offer for a drink. To my amazement, I find Trout is lying between us, as if guarding me from this stranger, while Mopsy is sitting in my lap, growling at Drew, and looking at him with suspicious dark eyes. At first they seem to have welcomed Drew into the house, but now the dogs seem uncertain about him. And as for Henry VIII, he's nowhere to be seen. I sneakily suspect he's made himself comfortable upstairs, on Weston's king-size bed. I'm not comfortable being face to face with this odorous man. I hoped I'd never see him again. But if he can shed light on what happened to me that night, I'm eager to hear what he has to say. But I don't feel remotely comfortable in this man's presence. I can't believe I was ever attracted to him. My heart is fluttering, but not in a good way. I feel as if a panicking pigeon is caught up in my chest, desperate to escape. The area above my lips is breaking out into a sweat. I'm wondering whether it was a wise idea to let this man into my house after all. I might have dated him for a while, but it does not mean I can actually trust him. I notice Drew rarely is as old as my father, but he's got a cockiness about him that I find unbecoming. He's about 6 foot tall, lean and well built. I guess he takes good care of himself, with regular workouts at the gym. His face is square-shaped, his eyes dark and piercing. He has a distinctive Roman nose, and his skin has a rough, ruddy texture, which suggests to me he might have had bad acne when he was a young man. He's not bad-looking, but there is something about him that turns my blood icy cold. He's wearing a duffel jacket over these tight black pants that cling to his body like rubber, and a pair of leather flip-flops on his feet. His clothes seem rather peculiar. So this memory of yours, it's likely to come back, is it? He asks me gingerly. The doctor thinks it's only a matter of time before that happens. Tell me, how do you know that I'm at this house? And why do you say I'm in danger? I need to hear what you have to say. I've been trying to figure out everything that's been happening, because I know someone tried to kill me. The reason why I know you're here at this house is because I've been following you around, Isla, to make sure you're safe. Because as I keep telling you, someone is trying to harm you.
Someone's trying to harm me. Why didn't you tell the police about this? Didn't they interview you?
Drew gives me a gormless grin. I'm sure you know, Isla, that there are some things you don't share with the police.
Don't talk in riddles, Drew. You're scaring me. Please tell me, who is trying to hurt me and why?
Are you really that stupid, Isla? Are you that naive? Do you not even remember that you were responsible for my wife's fortuitous death? But you conveniently forgot all about that, didn't you?
I was, I asked, confounded. But your wife had a massive stroke. How can I possibly be responsible for that?
You are to blame for my wife's death, Isla. You couldn't keep your bloody trap shut, could you? No, you couldn't. You're such a busybody, putting your nose into everybody's business. I loved my wife, Isla. I was never going to leave her for the likes of you, never. But you got it into your silly little naive head that I was going to divorce my wife, and that you and me were going to get married and live happily ever after. More fool you. Like that was ever going to happen. Do you think that I'd ever settle down with a girl like you? Not in a million years. You don't hold a candle to my wife, and you never could.
My grandmother told me, Drew, that you had assured me you'd end things with your wife, but she believed you were stringing me along. So you were all the time. You were never ever serious about me, were you?
Drew began to clap his hand. Well done! Your grandmother was right, Isla. Of course I was stringing you along, only you were far too dim to see it. I stare at Drew incredulously, with my eyes widening.
So I was just a plaything for you? You were using me?
Pretty much, said Drew, shaking his head. But then you did something very, very stupid without even consulting me. Something that made me furiously angry, Isla. You went to see my wife, didn't you? You went to visit her at my house, to tell her about our affair. You told her that we were both madly in love with each other, that I wanted to divorce her, and we were going to get married. You told her I'd struggled to tell her this as I didn't want to hurt her feelings. When I returned home to my wife, she was grievously upset, very overwrought. She was lying in a fetal position on the kitchen floor, sobbing her heart out. She was devastated to find out about us. She was inconsolable with grief. It was thanks to you sticking your neck in where it wasn't wanted that I saw my wife withering away like a dying flower in a vase. I told you that I would sort everything out, but I never intended to, because I loved my wife. I never loved you, Isla. I assured her you meant nothing to me. But a few hours later, after your visit with my wife, she dies of a massive stroke, brought on by what you told her. So yes, Isla, you're responsible for my wife's death. My children no longer have their mother. I no longer have the only woman that I ever loved. You, Isla, you took that all away from me. You're a prize bitch, that's what you are. You didn't care about tearing my family apart to get exactly what you wanted. And you really thought that I wanted you, that I was willing to exchange you for my wife. You're as mad as a March hare, you are.
I'm so sorry, Drew. I can't imagine how devastating it must have been for you to lose your wife. I must have felt confident that we were in love. That's why I probably told her. But looking at things objectively, I should never have got involved with you in the first place. But you're also responsible, because you cheated on her with me. If you loved your wife as much as you claim, why would you do something like that to her?
How dare you, Isla? How dare you speak to me like that? You were just a plaything, nothing serious. The next thing I know, Drew is shaking me violently hard. I never loved you, Isla, but you thought I did. More fool you. You decided to ruin my marriage by telling my wife everything. And you inadvertently murdered my wife because your words killed her. So you know what I did? I pretended to you that I was happy about my wife's death. I was staying at my mother's house, so I had an alibi. In the middle of the night, I crept out while your grandmother was celebrating her sister's 80th birthday in Fairbanks, Alaska. I came to see you. You were thrilled to see me. All you could talk about was how wonderful it is that we could finally be together, how serendipitous it was. Now my wife was dead, there would be no messy divorce, as you could adopt my kids. I told you I'd planned a trip on a motorboat with a picnic for us to celebrate the good news. You were so excited, saying how romantic I was. It was early in the morning. This time, I think it was. We were out on the ocean together. I told you I'd planned a lovely little trip for us on my motorboat, with a picnic and lots of champagne. You were thrilled, saying how romantic I was. It was early in the morning when we were out on the ocean. It must have been about this time. I told you we'd watch the sunset together.
Oh my God! It was you! You were the one that pushed me into the water.
Clever girl, Lila. You're finally working it out after all this time. But a little late in the day, isn't it? There you were, trying to open a bottle of French champagne, with your back turned away from me. I hit you on the back of the head so hard, throwing you into the ocean. You went down like a rock, but then you managed to resurface again. I honestly don't know how you survived. I really don't. So yes, Isla, the only person you're in danger from is me. Number one, I can't risk you remembering what happened. Number two, I need to finish what I started. And number three, Isla, I hate you. I really hate you. Do you think I'm going to let you live after you murdered my wife? It's not going to happen, Isla. You ruined my life. So this time, we're going to do things properly. Drew withdrew a revolver from his pocket, placing it at my head. Now you're going to do exactly what I say, Isla. And you are going to walk out of this house onto the beach. And if you dare scream, I'll kill you in an instant.
Look, Drew, please don't be like this. I must have meant something to you once. You must have liked me a little bit,
I say, trembling, tears spilling down my cheeks.
You're being unreasonable and unfair. I'm really sorry about your wife's stroke. And maybe I contributed to it by upsetting her. But I didn't set out to kill her. Surely you know that. And I'm really, really sorry about what happened.
Drew became angry. Won't you shut up, Isla? There's nothing more to be said. You killed my wife. You don't have to pull the trigger to kill someone. You upset her. You grieved her heart. You killed her. And you're going to pay for this, Isla. Drew is waving the revolver around and telling me to put the dogs in the kitchen, as Trout is growling at him and looks as if he's about to attack Drew, as if he senses something is terribly wrong, while Mopsy is baring his teeth at Drew and yakking non-stop. I lead the dogs into the kitchen and close the door behind them. They continue to bark frenziedly, frantically scraping at the door, desperate to get out. I am so numb with fear. I just do everything Drew tells me to do, wondering how I'm going to get out of this dreadful pickle. It's clear to me that Drew intends to harm me and kill me. If I scream for help, I'm dead. But whatever I do, I'm probably living on borrowed time. Drew leads the way for me out of Weston's house. Soon I'm staggering down 4 concrete steps, still wet from the rain, to the beach below. The weather is furiously angry, as a wind is whipping across the beach. The capricious trees on the edge of the beach are swinging their boughs furiously, while the waves are crashing thunderously against the shore. There is a full moon, hanging low in the inky sky, like a magnificent pearly button, sewn on an extravagant velvety evening gown. A silvery moon spills generously onto the beach, skimming across the ocean. It would be beguilingly pretty if I wasn't so desperately afraid, too afraid to fully appreciate it. My heart is booming thunderously in my chest that I can hear every single vibration. The sand is cold against my naked feet. I am frozen with terror, like a mouse trapped in a cat's jaws. I know not what to do. I want to fight back, scream, but I seem incompetent and incapable of doing anything, as if surrendering to my impending fate. But I don't want to die. I don't want to die.
Walk into the water now,
says Drew. Please, please don't do this, Drew. Please, I beg. The water is icy cold. I don't want to die this way. I don't want to die, Drew. I told you I'm sorry about your wife. I'm really sorry. Please be reasonable, Drew. Listen to me. Listen to me. I'm begging you. Listen to me. I'm not going to tell the police about you. I mean, I know your kids need their father, and they've already lost their mother. Can't we just move on from here? I won't tell them a thing.
You forget, Isla. I don't care about that. I don't want you breathing the same oxygen as me. Do you understand? You killed my wife. You forfeited the right to live. You deserve to die.
I tread into the icy cold water, with Drew plunging into the waves, as he continually points the revolver at my temple, and we go deeper and deeper into the ocean. Maybe it would be better if he shot me. Dying in the ocean a second time around is too hard for me to envisage. It is so icy, so dreadfully cold, that it shoots through me in painful spasms. I realise that Drew is wearing a wetsuit underneath the duffel coat to protect himself from the cold water. He's pressing the revolver tightly against my temple, leading me further and further into the ocean, until the water reaches under my arms. It is so cold. My body is going numb at the shock of the water, along with the icy cold wind blasting me from every side. Then I know what Drew is going to do. It's all too clear. He's going to drown me, and the next thing I know, he slips his revolver in his pocket and wrestles me under the water. I try to fight back, but I am no match for him. I feel myself fading very fast, and after a while, a serene peace seems to wash over me, and then for some reason that I cannot explain, Drew lets go of me, and I quickly come to the surface, gasping for breath. Then I see it. Something powerful, something big is pulling Drew off me. That's when I see the Bigfoot with the large yellow eyes, dragging Drew through the water like a sack of potatoes. Drew looks as if he's out cold, so I suspect the Bigfoot has hit him hard across the head. I frantically swim, dashing through the water, the spirited waves crashing against me. It is bitterly cold, so treacherously cold, but I reach the beach. The Bigfoot is standing over Drew. His yellow eyes meet mine.
Kilatakwa, hotali ba.
Go home. Get warm, he says. Thank you, I say, not understanding how I could understand what the Bigfoot was saying to me. My body is cold. The first thing I do when I get back is to pull my clothes off before I even enter Weston's house. I run into the bathroom, dry myself with a towel, and get under a warm shower until my body begins to warm up. And that's when I call the emergency services. Drew is quickly taken to hospital. When he recovers, he's arrested and charged with 2 counts of attempted murder, and is still in prison to this day. The police marvelled that I managed to escape certain drowning 2 times in a row, but I never told them about the mysterious black creature, the Bigfoot that came to my rescue. 2 years after the event, my grandmother married Weston, and so I have the most incredible step-grandfather. Weston can still be seen taking early morning walks on the beach with trout at his side, and occasionally he sees a long trail of overlarge footprints in the sand. He smiles contentedly to himself. He knows they belong to our Bigfoot friend. Me and my mother, despite our differences, have slowly but surely repaired our fractured relationship, as when my memory did return, I told her how I regretted some of the bad choices I'd made, and she has forgiven me. My mother considers herself a religious person, believing most people when they die are going to go straight to hell. She, on the other hand, is guaranteed a grand palace in the heavenly realms, based on her righteousness. While I love my mother, I think she's the most judgmental woman I have ever had the privilege to meet, and I wonder why my father puts up with her. But that's life for you. Some mysteries can never be explained. I still wonder why that Bigfoot rescued me, twice from a deadly fate. But maybe some answers will never be known. My mother paid Drew a visit in prison, believing she was going to do her Christian duty, in warning him about what awaited him on the other side, based on what he'd done to me. But her ministering to him did not work. He told her to shut up, so that was my mother told off. It would seem he had no idea what clopped him across the head, but he was very unrepentant on what he'd done to me, saying his only regret was that he had not shot me in the head. He had wanted to make my death look like an accident, but I guess he never anticipated a Bigfoot coming to my rescue. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, isn't that the most incredible story? To be rescued by a Bigfoot twice in a row when you're drowning in the water, and now we know why. We know that this awful boyfriend wanted Isla dead. But Isla was also responsible in her own way, but at least she was able to admit the error of her ways.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.